Chapter 1420. As Shi Tianhao merged with the Void Storm and charged at his opponent, Xiaoyan used the Dao Annihilation Rebirth to trigger the Dark Sea Calamity to interweave with the Void Storm. The invasion of the Void Sea's power caused Heavenly Doom to shake even more intensely, as if it was enraged. This time, Xiaoyan no longer restrained it. Instead, he guided the enraged Heavenly Doom to unleash its power. Even the king of the underworld and the others sensed that something was wrong. They wanted to stop Xiaoyan's actions, but they felt powerless. As the dark red light flashed, not only Xiaoyan's body but also the dark sea, even the surface of the void storm seemed to be plated with a layer of dark red. The surging tide immediately rushed towards the Emperor of the Underworld and Golden Cicada, like an earth-shattering wave. In the crack leading to the void battlefield, the void storm was endless, and it seemed to be growing more and more intense, as if there was no end to it. The even more ferocious power in the Dark Sea was also abandoned and mobilized. The power of heaven and earth from both sides was now opposing each other, but under the guidance of Xiaoyan and Shi Tianhao, they strangely combined, transforming into a terrifying tide unprecedented since the start of the war, rushing towards the king of the underworld, Golden Cicada, and the others. At this moment, even the expressions of the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada changed slightly. Although the tide before them was already extremely ferocious, it was not just a single wave. It seemed to be endless, constantly drawing on the terrifying destructive power of the Dark Sea and the Void Sea. Moreover, this terrifying tide seemed to be surging and would only get stronger and stronger. But what they were most concerned about was that as the tide surged, Heavenly Doom's turbulence in the Dark Sea was also growing more intense. With Xiaoyan's momentum, whether it was the king of the underworld, Shen Tuzhe, or Wu Mingqi, they all vaguely felt that their connection to the Dark Sea was weakening, while Xiaoyan's connection to Heavenly Doom and the Dark Sea was growing stronger. The king of the underworld and Shen Tuzhe's interference on Xiaoyan was now faintly ineffective, and their control over the Netherworld Sea was instead affected. The vicious good fortune magical treasure, Heavenly Doom, was alarmed, and seemed to be making a decision. Furthermore, the vast Netherworld Sea seemed to have its own independent will, which put them under immense pressure. At this moment, they first had to face the baptism of the Netherworld Sea's myriad tribulations and the Void Storm. The king of the underworld directly shattered the Netherworld altar beneath him. Layers of black light formed a barrier in front of him, blocking the raging waves that engulfed the world. The Book of Life and Death was held in his hand. Rays of gray light flowed and interacted with the magical power of the king of the underworld. A great power burst forth and strengthened the barrier. On the other side, Golden Cicada manifested the Buddha and the Pure Land, turning a short distance into a world to protect him. Wu Mingqi was not attacked by Shi Tianhao's 9 heavens formless void thunder. The terrifying void storm did not target him, and the art of annihilation rebirth that Xiaoyan had triggered in the Netherworld Sea's myriad tribulations would not be directed at him. But now that the raging waves were passing by, even standing at the edge, one could feel the destructive power contained within. Although he was unwilling, Wu Mingqi had to admit that if this power were to attack him head-on, he would undoubtedly die. There was no doubt about it. Not to mention resisting, he would not even have the chance to escape. Whether it was his personality or his status, Wu Mingqi had always been proud and arrogant. He had a firm and unyielding will. But at this moment, he retreated with a complicated expression, watching the terrifying raging waves brush past him. To him, the outcome before him was not a crime of fighting. Shaking his head, Wu Mingqi retreated. The images of the Netherworld Sea were still surging in his eyes. Behind him, an extremely unstable domain passageway appeared, as if it would distort and shatter at any moment. Wu Mingqi let out a long sigh. Without saying anything more, he turned and walked into the crooked passageway, gradually disappearing. Compared to him, Shen Tuzhe was in a miserable state. While Shi Tianhao's 9 heavens formless void thunder was dealing with the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada, it did not forget about him. Similarly, thunderbolts were born from the void and landed on him. If not for Golden Cicada's protection, he might not even have had the time to trigger the power of the Netherworld Sea to defend himself. And when the torrent of the Void Storm and the Netherworld Sea's calamity arrived in front of him, Shintazé was unable to break through the Netherworld Sea's passageway and escape like Wu Mingqi, restricted by Xiaoyan's power. Now it was Xiaoyan who was suppressing and interfering with his connection to the Netherworld Sea, making it difficult for him to operate his divine senses and thoughts, making it difficult for him to trigger the Netherworld Sea. At this moment, even Golden Cicada could not protect himself or take care of him. Shintazé could only watch helplessly as the terrifying tide in front of him engulfed him. Shintazé's face was as gloomy as water. He suddenly clasped his palms together and exerted all his strength. The 18 golden lamps above his head were all lit up, manifesting into 18 rays of Buddha's light, layer upon layer protecting him. Amidst the Buddha's light, the sounds of Sanskrit chanting could be heard incessantly. Vajra wheels, monk staffs, golden alms bowls, golden pagoda, prayer beads, and many other Buddhist treasures appeared. Within the Buddha's light, there seemed to be a pure land where all the elements were perfected. Being in it, everything that one wanted to do could be easily accomplished. It was the pure land of victory, eliminating jealousy and worries, purifying the 5 skandhas, and transforming jealousy to obtain wisdom. It represented all achievements, perfection, and fulfillment of one's desires. But under the pure land of victory, beneath Shintazé's body, wisps of gray mist emerged. Its power was completely different from that of the pure land of Buddhism. It was dark, deep, and lifeless. In the gray mist, a half-black and half-white Dao fruit gradually appeared. Then, it turned into a light wheel of intertwined black and white colors. It kept rotating, as if it was performing the cycle of life and death, the netherworld. As Shintazé clasped his palms together, 2 completely different principles and concepts fused and repelled each other at the same time. Yet they produced an extremely powerful force. With a thought in his mind, a black iron staff flew out. It was a magic weapon of the incarnation level. 18 golden tin rings appeared on the originally extremely ferocious black iron staff. As they swayed, they gently collided with each other and made a sound. The sound caused the murderous aura on the black iron staff to converge, revealing a compassionate Buddha's will. This was a magic weapon that Shintazé carried with him. Its power was extraordinary. It was originally refined with the orthodoxy of the king of the underworld, and then refined again with the Dharma. Now its power was even more powerful. However, it still needed time to accumulate before it had a chance to reach the Mahayana grade. At this moment, Shintazé exerted all his strength. Naturally, all kinds of treasures on him were activated at the same time. In addition to the magic weapons, numerous talismans lit up, and even an array diagram lit up at the same time. It turned into the dark world of death, protecting him together with the layers of defense he had set up before. But unfortunately, under the impact of the terrifying tide, all his defenses were useless. They collapsed in an instant. Shintazé could only watch helplessly as his primordial spirit continuously turned into ashes. He had prepared more than one method of rebirth for himself, but none of them worked as they should. Under the terrifying power that could destroy the great Tao of heaven and earth, they were all destroyed in an instant. Shintazé struggled to look at the raging tide in front of him. It was as if his vision wanted to pass through the layers of storms and see Xiaoyan. He vaguely caught a glimpse of Xiaoyan's figure, but saw that Xiaoyan's eyes were fixed on the king of the underworld and Golden Cicada. Are we no longer enemies of the same level? This was the last thought in Shintazé's mind. In the next moment, his entire body was submerged by the destructive torrent. His spirit was destroyed, and he no longer existed. Not only Shintazé, but the Underworld Sea could also sense that he could not effectively communicate with the Underworld Sea, and could not open a path to retreat. The destructive tide was overwhelming and endless. Even he found it difficult to deal with it. Your Majesty, be decisive. After all, this is not the decisive battlefield, is it? At this moment, Golden Cicada's voice suddenly rang in the King of the Underworld's ears. A cold light flashed in the King of the Underworld's eyes, and he suddenly turned to look at Golden Cicada. At this moment, Golden Cicada's expression was serene, although his protective Buddhist light was constantly being worn away, and was about to completely shatter. However, Golden Cicada was not in a hurry. He transformed back into the appearance of the young monk in gray. He opened his palm, and 2 rays of light, one red and one purple, flew out from his palm. These two rays of light intertwined with each other in the void, circling nonstop, and then suddenly shot up into the sky. As they intertwined, the two rays of light, one red and one purple, opened a hole in the void above Golden Cicada's head. In that hole, a large amount of white light flashed. The white light gradually turned into a door, which opened with a loud bang. When the door opened, the white light dimmed and disappeared without a trace. It was as if an ordinary door had appeared in the void. However, in the violent and chaotic underworld sea, where disasters and tribulations filled the sky, such a peaceful scene was extremely abnormal, especially from the fox, which was as vast as the sky and the sea. It was as if there was no end to the spiritual energy surging out, which was even more eye-catching. Through the door, one could vaguely see what looked like ribbons of light, rising and falling, flashing in the void. Everyone present knew that that was the spirit sea. Those ribbons of light were the physical manifestation of the great Tao of heaven and earth in the spirit sea. Under the destructive tide that Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao had randomly released, even the open door of the spirit sea seemed very unstable, as if it would close at any time. But in this short period of time, the door of the spirit sea seemed to have frozen the space where Golden Cicada was. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Golden Cicada leaped up. His feet seemed to be stepping on invisible stairs. He seemed to be walking carelessly, but in an instant he had already arrived in front of the door and stepped through it. Before the door could automatically close again, under the bombardment of the destructive tide, it began to distort violently. Finally, it turned into a shadow of light and burst like a bubble. The king of the underworld watched this scene expressionlessly, then looked at Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao. Finally he did the same thing. Two rays of light, one purple and one red, rose from his palms and flew into the air, transforming into a door leading to the spirit sea. Where do you think you're going? Xiao Yan and Shi Tianhao had already arrived in front of them. The king of the underworld frowned. Yan Xinghe's evil soul stood in front of him with a calm expression, while the king of the underworld himself was pulled away by the door of the spirit sea. Xiao Yan glanced at Yan Xinghe. Little junior brother, your old man has returned safely. You can pursue the spirit sea in peace. Leave this place and the divine land to me. Chapter 1421. Shi Tianhao glanced at Xiao Yan, and immediately nodded. Eldest senior brother, after this incident, you have made great progress in refining the netherworld sea. However, you should still be careful. As he spoke, Shi Tianhao opened his palm and used the secret key of the netherworld sea that Lin Feng had left for him. Two beams of light, one purple and one red, shot into the sky and opened the door to the netherworld sea. Then he and the great celestial wheel were received by the door, and left the netherworld sea. After losing Shi Tianhao's guidance, although the raging tide in the netherworld sea was still abnormally violent, its seemingly endless momentum also stopped. The further the life and death underworld Tao fruit refined evil soul was from the owner of the Tao fruit, the greater the drop in strength. At this moment, the king of the underworld had already left the netherworld sea. Yan Xinghe's aura immediately started to weaken. Under the impact of the raging tide, Yan Xinghe's Yuan spirit, which was in front of Xiao Yan, suffered heavy injuries and became abnormally weak. Because the power of the netherworld sea surrounded him, it formed a disguised imprisonment effect. Not only could Yan Xinghe's evil soul not leave the netherworld sea with the king of the underworld, the life and death underworld Tao fruit refined from his evil soul was also blocked by the domain power, and left in the netherworld sea. With a thought from Xiao Yan, the raging tide gradually calmed down. Although the netherworld sea still looked like it was doomsday, the ominous omen that seemed like the end of the world had finally disappeared. At this moment, the calamities and tribulations in the netherworld sea started to encircle and suppress the void storms that rushed in. The netherworld sea was connected to the empty sea. The abnormally terrifying domain crack no longer expanded. Instead, it constantly twisted and started to gradually shrink. The domain power of the netherworld sea started to repair its damage. During this process, many calamities and tribulations flowed out of the netherworld sea and disappeared into the dark void. As the void storms that rushed into the netherworld sea gradually dissipated, the huge crack also gradually healed until it disappeared. heavenly calamity no longer manifested its true form. It was once again shrouded by a dark red light, and turned into a red pillar of light that looked over the netherworld sea. After the previous battle, the world around the red pillar of light had been reduced to nothing. A dangerous place like the netherworld sea required a long time to transform, and where everyone was previously, the ring-shaped domain formed by the many netherworld sea realms, had almost ceased to exist after the previous battle. As time and space changed, the ring-shaped spatial domain completely disappeared, and the dark sea realm and middle realms from before also disappeared without a trace. Only an independent small world, like an atmospheric bubble, was near the red pillar of light. This world was the first world among all the worlds within worlds. It was also the world where Wen Qiang had lived when he fell into the netherworld sea in the past. After Xiao Yan entered this world, he saw a life and death netherworld Dao fruit appear in the void, and Yan Xingha's figure appeared. As the half-black, half-white life and death nether Dao fruit spun, Yan Xingha's figure shifted from the black side to the white side. Then he stepped out of the Dao fruit. At this moment, Yan Xingha's aura was much weaker. Although the tide had subsided, he had still been seriously injured. If not for the tide subsiding, he would have died on the spot. Even so, he, who had returned to the world through the life and death nether Dao fruit, had become extremely weak. The life and death nether Dao fruit that had refined his evil soul had shattered and ceased to exist. Without the Dao fruit, Yan Xingha, who had been refined into an evil soul, was like a tree without roots. Although he still existed in the world, he was not far from disappearing completely, unless the king of the underworld personally activated another netherworld Dao fruit to refine him before he completely disappeared. But the king of the underworld had already escaped to the spirit sea. The fate that awaited Yan Xingha was self-evident. However, Yan Xingha did not feel depressed or frustrated. Instead, he was abnormally calm. To him, complete extinction might be a form of release. Within the dark sea realm, Yan Xingha's emotions, which had always been calm, finally showed some fluctuations. He looked around, and his eyes flashed as though he was thinking about something. Xiao Yan looked at him indifferently. That's right. This is where Dao Venerable Red Sun lived after he fell into the dark sea. Yan Xingha looked at him and said, Daoist Xian Du told me about it. His voice was gentle like flowing water. However, there was no warmth in it. It was neither cold nor hot, as though there were no emotions in it. Xiao Yan raised his eyebrows slightly. In today's world, there were not many who knew the title of the king of the underworld, or rather, the title of the capital emperor before he became the human emperor. There were very few written records. The first time Xiao Yan had heard of the name, Daoist Xian Du, was from the king of the underworld's personal disciple, Su Anda. In fact, everyone referred to him as the king of the underworld. Even the title of the king of the underworld when he was on the throne was not known to many. However, as someone from the same generation as the king of the underworld, Yan Xingha, who had watched him ascend to the throne as the second temple master of Taishu Temple, was naturally not surprised that he knew the title of the king of the underworld before he ascended to the throne. Xiao Yan put his hands behind his back. He did not feel the pressure of facing a legendary figure in the immortal Dao. He said indifferently, Your judgment as an emperor is really not that good. Yan Xingha shook his head. Xia Fangyu abandoned the divine abyss to search for the cloud demon first. It was unwise. It was indeed beyond my expectations. It was my mistake that caused the divine land to become a threat. He only mentioned Xia Huang, not the king of the underworld. At this point, there was nothing much to say about the king of the underworld. Xiao Yan looked at him and narrowed his eyes. Oh, you mean that as long as Xia Huang goes to search for Jihuang Xinyuan first, everything will be fine? Yan Xingha said indifferently, Senior brother Wen is already in danger. There is no need to make things difficult for him. He paused for a moment and continued. In the future, when he returns from the netherworld sea, he should know that the bigger picture is more important. Xiao Yan laughed coldly and stared at Yan Xingha. It is said that when a person is about to die, his words are kind. Seeing you today, I know that there are always exceptions. Yan Xingha's expression was as calm as before. The divine land is above everything, including Senior Brother Wen, Xia Fangyu and me. When Senior Brother Wen was alive, He could suppress me, Xia Fengyu, and the Cloud Demon. But when he is gone, no one can guarantee what the Cloud Demon will do. Xiaoyan looked at him coldly. In terms of hatred, Wen Qiang has killed countless demons. Do you think the possibility of the demons accepting his family or killing them is higher? Yan Xinghe said indifferently. When senior brother Wen was stubbornly leaving the White Cloud Mountain, I already tried to persuade him, but he did not listen. Xiao Yan frowned slightly, and the coldness in his eyes disappeared. He sized up Yan Xinghe, and his gaze was much calmer, but there was a hint of danger in it. After a while, Xiao Yan said slowly, other than the grudge with Xia Huang, the Cloud Demon has never made things difficult for others in the Divine Land. As for the Phoenix race, the Divine Parasol Tree race, the Qilin race, the Xieji race, and many other demon races, they rarely made things difficult for the human race in the primordial epoch. Even if there were disputes, it was the human race who attacked first. In the primordial epoch, the two worlds were at odds. Even with the Saint Emperor of the demon race, there were still many demons who did not participate in the war between the two worlds. Yan Xinghe seemed to understand what he was implying, but his expression remained indifferent. Demons are demons in the end. Xiaoyan stared at him without saying anything, and his gaze became even sharper. Yan Xinghe seemed to be unaware of this. Perhaps the Cloud Demon will side with the demon race, or perhaps not. However, I will not place my hopes on his choice, and the Divine Land will not either. He glanced at Xiaoyan. If I had known that senior brother Wen had not truly fallen, and that there was a higher chance that he could refine the Netherworld Sea and return to the Divine Land, I might have made a different decision. However, it was not because I trusted the Cloud Demon, nor was it because I feared senior brother Wen. It was because senior brother Wen's existence was more useful to the Divine Land than Xia Fengyu. However, at that time, the cooperation between our temple and Xia Fengyu was seamless. He was naturally more useful to the Divine Land than the untrustworthy Cloud Demon. Yan Xinghe's tone was as calm as water. Under the premise of not knowing senior brother Wen's exact situation, no matter how many times it happened, my choice would not have changed. However, before senior brother Wen died, I had failed him. When Xiaoyan heard this, he had a faint smile on his face. In other words, you only feel guilty for deceiving Dao Lord Scarlet Sun at the last moment. You do not have any regrets about the matter itself. Yan Xinghe said indifferently, why should I regret it? I don't think there is anything wrong with my decision. Xiaoyan looked at him strangely. If Dao Lord Scarlet Sun did not leave White Cloud Mountain himself, but chased you out, what do you think the outcome would have been? Yan Xinghe was silent for a moment. The matter of the past ended with Wen Qiang leaving the mountain. There was no drastic change in Taishu Temple, but there was no doubt that there was a huge commotion within. At that time, Wen Qiang's marriage with Cloud Demon was controversial, but there were many people who accepted and supported it. If Wen Qiang wanted to forcefully expel Yan Xinghe and the others who opposed him, it would not have been difficult. When he and Yan Xinghe clashed, the Haotian mirror would most likely remain neutral. Furthermore, the Haotian mirror had yet to fully recover. If there was an internal conflict, even if the Haotian mirror and Yan Xinghe were on the same side, the victor would still be Wen Qiang. However, if the matter really went out of control, Taishu Temple would inevitably fall into discord, and its strength would decrease. In the end, Wen Qiang chose to go into exile to settle the dispute. He would still participate in the war between the two worlds. After a brief silence, Yan Xinghe said senior brother Wen would not do that. In his heart, the most important thing is the Divine Land. On this point, we share the same opinion. Senior brother would not sit and watch our temple fall into discord. However, he made the wrong decision regarding the Cloud Demon. Xiaoyan chuckled, but his smile was a bit cold. Yeah, he's actually always been thinking about your Void Temple, thinking about his sect. That's why he only asked you not to use the Clear Sky Mirror to help Emperor Xia search for the whereabouts of the Cloud Demon during that battle with the Extreme Emperor's Divine Abyss in the Ancient Era. Knowing of the dangers of that battle, he only asked you not to use the Clear Sky Mirror to help Emperor Xia search for the whereabouts of the Cloud Demon, and not to rely on you for protection, making it so that there is no longer any room for reconciliation between you and Emperor Xia. If you don't find the Cloud Demon, Will you really become enemies with Xia Huang? Not necessarily. How can Xia Huang be sure that after that battle, how much of the Haotian mirror's power is left, and whether it can find the cloud demon? Although Xia Huang dotes on his children, is he willing to take the initiative to become enemies with Taishu Temple? If he wants to cover it up, he can. It's just a matter of whether he is willing or not. Yan Xinghe did not deny it. He nodded indifferently. Demons are demons after all. It is best to nip the risk in the bud. Xiaoyan looked at him. Ice and charcoal do not cook the same stove. We have nothing to talk about. You don't look like someone who talks nonsense, and you don't care about what others think. Why are you saying so much to me? Chapter 1422. Xiaoyan looked at Yan Xinghe calmly. In your eyes you are open and aboveboard. Even if you don't have a clear conscience, you are doing it for the greater good. But that is just your way of thinking. What do I see? A cold, narrow-minded person who speaks pompous words but is selfish and stupid. Xiaoyan said coldly, people of different principles cannot make plans together. There is nothing more to say between us. I am about to leave this world completely, so there is no difference between what I say and what I say. Yan Xinghe's gaze landed on Xiaoyan. I said all this because I want to confirm one thing. Taoist Xian Du has already told me about your relationship. Your actions are more dangerous than senior brother Wen's. After talking to you, I can confirm this. Xiaoyan smiled indifferently. That is why ice and charcoal are different. Yan Xinghe was already very weak. He clasped his palms together, and did not say anything else. He looked straight at Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan raised his eyebrows. You mean you want to continue fighting with me? I don't need to fight with you. You will turn into ashes very soon. Moreover, I have already fought with you. At least in this netherworld sea, you are not my match. I have the geographical advantage. I am in perfect condition. You are not at your peak. But I am at the spirit refinement returning realm. If I beat you, who are at the tribulation passing realm, I am not taking advantage of you, right? Yan Xinghe revealed a faint smile. You will fight. I can vaguely feel that you have obtained senior brother Wen's 9 sons creation divine light. He was smiling, but there was no joy in it. There was no warmth or passion. It still gave off a distant and indifferent feeling. It was as if he did not have any emotions. Xiaoyan looked at him and his gaze became colder. Yan Xinghe did not care and said indifferently, how about it? Using senior brother Wen's 9 sons divine light to bury me. Does that make you happy? Do you feel that this is the retribution I deserve? Xiaoyan looked at him and suddenly laughed. You've been refined into an evil soul by the king of the underworld. What other trump cards can you hide? You definitely don't know the heavenly secret art. Even if I haven't seen the other magical powers of Taishu Temple, I've heard of them. But I really can't think of anything else you can rely on in your current state. Are you trying to provoke me into fighting you because you want to catch me by surprise and drag me down with you? Or are you trying to sabotage me, sabotage my sex refinement of the netherworld sea, and use your last bit of energy to weaken my sex strength in the last moment of your life? Only then can you leave with a clear conscience and no regrets? Yan Xinghe looked at Xiaoyan, and the smile on his face gradually became clearer. He turned his head and looked around the netherworld sea, then looked up at the sky and said carelessly, my talent is not as good as senior brother Wen's. I can't cultivate the heavenly secret art, so I had to study some things myself. Finally, I made some progress, but before I finished, I had to fight with Taoist Xian Du. That's why I couldn't leave anything for the sect. But these few things, I've studied them thoroughly. They belong to me, and I don't want to use them. Even if Taoist Xian Du used the netherworld Tao fruit of life and death, he couldn't force me to use them. Now that the netherworld Tao fruit of life and death is gone, I can let it see the light of day again. Yan Xinghe said blandly, can you teach me? Xiaoyan looked at him, and the smile on his face grew wider, but his eyes grew colder. Don't worry. I know you don't have good intentions, and I know you want to drag me down with you with your dying strike. But I'm not afraid. The smile on Xiaoyan's face disappeared, and his expression turned cold. He said blandly, I'll give you a chance, but let's see how far you can go. Although I don't like you as a senior, I'll give you this last bit of dignity. He stood in the middle of the Netherworld Sea realm, but he didn't use the power of the Netherworld Sea, nor did he use Heaven's Bane to communicate with the creation treasure. He just walked straight towards Yan Xinghe. Yan Xinghe's expression was indifferent, and he didn't care what Xiaoyan thought. To him, it was enough for him to have a chance to show off his skills at the last moment of his life. It's just that when he saw Xiaoyan walking over step by step, his usually unperturbed state of mind still slightly shook. He seemed to see a familiar figure on this resolute and confident young man. He was wearing a brown linen robe that looked tattered, and he had an arrogant and fearless expression on his face. His laughter seemed to be coming from afar, and it was getting closer and closer. Yan Xinghe's eyes narrowed, and the scene in his memory disappeared. All that was left was Xiaoyan, who was walking towards him. As Xiaoyan walked forward, his entire body was enveloped in flames, and his figure grew taller. In the end, he turned into a 9-zhang-tall god of flames that looked at Yan Xinghe. He extended his palm forward, and streams of true fire gathered. They slowly condensed, and finally formed a flaming lotus flower above his palm. This lotus flower didn't look terrifying, but it was very exquisite. It was divided into 5 layers, and the bottom layer was green. It looked as dense as the earth, and there were no flames leaping about, but it gave off an extremely heavy feeling. Above the green was pure gold. Rays of light emerged from the flames, and they were as dazzling as needles. When others looked at them, it was as if they were staring at the sun. Above the gold was black, as if black smoke was swirling around it. It gave off an extremely ferocious feeling, as if it wanted to devour the heavens and the earth. But above the black petals, there was a layer of milky white petals, which were extremely positive. Above the milky white lotus petals, there were a few dainty smears of gold, with red and blue light constantly flowing on the surface. At the core of this flame refinement, there were a few red spots of light that looked like lotus seeds. The red was resplendent and pure, like a ruby. It made one feel as if their soul had sunk into it, unable to extricate themselves. The entire flaming lotus did not reveal any particularly terrifying aura, but Yan Xinghe's gaze turned even more serious. No matter what plans he had, the opponent in front of him was worthy of his attention. He could clearly feel the astonishing destructive power contained within the small flaming lotus. The power contained within was incomparable to the 5-colored flaming lotus that Xiaoyan had used against the king of the underworld. Xiaoyan tapped his finger lightly, and the terrifying 6-colored flaming lotus flew towards Yan Xinghe, as if it was impossible to dodge or avoid. Yan Xinghe took a deep breath, and his hands, which were clasped together in front of his chest, formed a strange hand seal. His primordial spirit, which was already extremely weak, and even showing signs of dissipating, suddenly exploded with astonishing power. 2 Dao fruits that looked like balls of light, one half black and half white, and the other tall and ethereal, rapidly fused into one. From this resplendent ball of light, rays of light suddenly rushed out and rapidly drew in the void. There was clearly a gap between the rays of light, but it made Xiaoyan feel like he was trapped in a prison, as if the entire world had become a cage. The Netherworld Sea, which was clearly more connected to him, was now like a fence, wrapping him and Yan Xinghe within it. The Blood River True Water and Netherworld True Water intertwined to form an iron fence. The 9 Nether Een Wind and Infinite Astral Baleful Chi turned into chains, and the Nether Evil Flame and Mysterious Heavenly Tribulation Flame turned into locks. Together, they formed a huge cage that trapped Xiaoyan like a trapped beast, unable to break out. Xiaoyan even felt that his connection with the heaven and earth spiritual chi had been cut off. He raised his eyebrows slightly. He could not be more familiar with this spell, because he knew it too. Heaven Cage Sigil. It was one of the signature spells of Taishu Temple, and it was not difficult to cultivate. Not to mention the Yuanying and Golden Elixir periods. Even Foundation Establishment and Qi Refinement Stage disciples could cultivate it. Many disciples of Taishu Temple even started cultivating the Heaven Cage Sigil as their first spell. And the Heaven Cage Sigil had an extremely unique point. It was that it had limitless potential. When Qi Refinement Stage cultivators used it, it was a form of power. When Primordial Spirit Stage cultivators used it, it was another form of earth-shattering power. At this moment, In Yan Xinghe's hands, Xiaoyan truly experienced this point. However, if it was just the Heaven Cage sigil, Xiaoyan would not take it to heart, even if the one casting it was Yan Xinghe. His six-colored fiery lotus, he was confident that it could burn Yan Xinghe and the Heaven Cage sigil to ashes, turning them into nothingness. Yan Xinghe was clearly aware of this point, and knew that he only had this one chance. Seeing Xiaoyan's six-colored fiery lotus, he knew that in his current state, even if he did not end up dying because of the life and death nether Dao fruit shattering, he would definitely die after taking this attack from Xiaoyan. What he hoped for was that when he was killed by Xiaoyan, he could drag Xiaoyan down with him. At the very least, he could destroy the connection between Xiaoyan and the Netherworld Sea. With Yan Xinghe's shrewd eyesight, he could clearly see that although Xiaoyan's magical powers were shocking, and his skills made him secretly amazed, the current Xiaoyan, without the support of the Netherworld Sea and the power of Heaven's calamity, would only be at the level of a declining Dharma realm human expert. Moreover, he was not good at defending himself. Although he was proficient in the Tao of life and death, and had begun to touch upon the Tao of life and death, he was not like the king of the underworld, who was proficient in the Tao of rebirth. This was his chance, and also the only thing he could try to do in the final moments of his life. Yan Xinghe clasped his palms together, and the ball of light in front of him completely disappeared. As for the Heaven Cage sigil surrounding him and Xiaoyan, it suddenly shook, and began to collapse towards the center, targeting Xiaoyan. This collapse was like the collapse of the heavenly Tao, and the world was heading towards Armageddon. But what made his heart palpitate the most was that Xiaoyan suddenly felt that there was a world within his body that seemed to be affected by the collapse of the world outside. It was collapsing at the same time, and there was a feeling that it could not be reversed, contained, or stopped. It was easy to defend against attacks from the outside world, but it completely came from within his body, and he could not stop it, so how could he defend against it? Such a ruthless and ferocious technique was completely different from the majority of the Tao techniques and magical powers passed down in Taishu Temple. But at this moment, it exploded with an incomparably ferocious power, wanting to bury Xiaoyan in this netherworld sea world that could be said to be his home field. Yan Xinghe, at this moment, was not looking at the six-colored fire lotus flying towards him, but at Xiaoyan. Chapter 14:23. Although Yan Xinghe's attack originated from the Heaven Cage sigil, its lethality and viciousness surpassed most of the Tao techniques and mystiques in this world. Even the many mystiques in the Taishu Temple could not compare to it. From the simple Heaven Cage sigil, it returned to its original state, and produced another extreme transformation. If this news were to spread out, it would be enough to shake the entire divine prefecture. At this moment, Yan Xinghe's primordial spirit also showed signs of collapse. The effect of the mystique seemed to be affecting his body at the same time. Perhaps this was the uniqueness and viciousness of the mystique. It was the true mystique of mystique. And this mystique was currently emitting a dazzling radiance and destructive power. Feeling the changes in his body and looking at Yan Xinghe's situation, how could Xiaoyan not know what he was thinking? Yan Xinghe was not concerned about whether he would be killed by the six-colored fiery lotus. He was only concerned about whether his attack could achieve its goal of severely injuring, or even killing Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan's gaze was cold and his lips curled into a smile. However, there was a hint of viciousness in his smile. With a soft shout, Xiaoyan's hands formed seals and formed a seal in front of his chest. The void that was previously isolated by the Heaven Cage sigil had been restored to Xiaoyan with the collapse of the confinement. However, Xiaoyan did not use the power of the Netherworld Sea to attack Yan Xinghe. This time, he used his own spiritual power to execute the Tao Annihilation Rebirth technique. However, he did not use it to attack Yan Xinghe. The Mystique Rebirth technique actually showed signs of reversing. With this reversal of the Tao Annihilation Rebirth technique as a foundation, Xiaoyan executed another Mystique Rebirth technique. It was a Mystique Rebirth technique that he rarely used, the 8 trigrams disintegration. He cultivated the Heavens Tao Sutra and the 8 trigrams scripture of the Great Tao. It was the first mystique he had created after comprehending it. It was not a disintegration that could be used to attack the opponent, nor was it an external defense that could remove external demons. Instead, It was a completely new transformation that could remove internal demons. This change had been created a long time ago. It was a result of Xiao Yan's golden elixir period, when the three fires entered his body. He had obtained it by calming the true fire that was wreaking havoc in his body. It was just that before, Xiao Yan had only used it in the process of self-cultivation to resolve the dangers of the inner demons, and to calm his mind. He cultivated many kinds of true flames at the same time, and it was very dangerous. The change in the collapse of the 8 trigrams to resolve the inner demons played a considerable role. And now, this mystique transformation was executed by Xiao Yan once again. With the powerful power of the reverse Tao annihilation rebirth, he suppressed the chaos in his body caused by Yan Xinghe's technique. Xiao Yan chuckled. Heaven Cage Curse Seal, 8 trigrams collapse, heh. After being forcefully suppressed by him, the seemingly unstoppable and uncontrollable destructive changes in his body actually began to gradually slow down. The raging storm began to show signs of calming down. Having also noticed this, Yan Xinghe sighed and did not say anything. He knew that his attempt had already failed. Xiao Yan had blocked his final attack. Even though he was still injured, at least his life was not in danger. His connection with the netherworld sea would most likely not be lost. And that horrifying 6-colored fiery lotus was already in front of him. Yan Xinghe watched this scene silently. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed and his expression fluctuated. That horrifying 6-colored fiery lotus floated in midair, and actually stopped for a moment. It was not because Xiao Yan had been affected by Yan Xinghe's attack, but because Xiao Yan had actively controlled the 6-colored fiery lotus to actually stop for a moment. Putting aside the fact that Xiao Yan could still control such a horrifying and tyrannical power, his control over the firmament flaming lotus had already reached such a high level. Yan Xinghe definitely did not think that Xiao Yan had given up on the idea of personally sending him to his death. Xiao Yan's gaze was cold as he stared at Yan Xinghe and said slowly, I know that you mentioned Tao venerate Scarlet Sun's 9 Suns creation divine light just to provoke me and create an opportunity for yourself to attack. But I do have such thoughts about what you said. Actually, you did not have to go through so much trouble. Even if you had not mocked me, I would have attacked. Xiao Yan's gaze swept across Yan Xinghe coldly. Suddenly, a dazzling radiance flickered around his body. The reddish-gold radiance was like a blazing sun, illuminating the dark netherworld sea. Countless talisman patterns surged from it, shaking the surrounding space. The creation divine light that originally belonged to Wen Qiang and now belonged to Xiao Yan, 9 suns. Xiao Yan's entire body surged with dermic powers. Under the illumination of this divine light, he was like a god descending to the netherworld sea. As he bellowed, the shadows of 9 dazzling suns rose from the reddish-gold radiance, blazing and vigorous. Among them, the shadows of 6 suns gradually materialized in the reddish-gold radiance, as though real suns had descended into the netherworld sea. At the same time, there were 6 of them. In the next moment, the 6 suns that were like real existences disappeared, and the 6-colored firmament fire lotus, suspended above Yan Xinghe's head, suddenly underwent a shocking change. The terrifying firmament fire lotus, which was originally alone, instantly turned into 6. The 6 seemingly fragile, but incomparably terrifying, 6-colored firmament fire lotus swayed in the netherworld sea, forming a shocking scene. Although each firmament fire lotus was much weaker than the original 6-colored firmament fire lotus, the simultaneous appearance of 6 firmament fire lotuses brought about an even more earth-shattering pressure. It was a sign of extreme destruction and destruction. Xiao Yan said indifferently, Tao venerate Scarlet Sun might not wish to see this scene, but... He pressed down with his palm, and the 6 firmament fire lotuses fell on Yan Xinghe's head. Looking at the reddish-gold creation divine light and the 6 terrifying firmament fire lotuses, Yan Xinghe, who had always been calm, fell into a momentary trance. The scene of that familiar figure activating the 9 heavens secret art and battling Jihuang Xinyuan appeared before his eyes once again. It was still the last impression Yan Xinghe had of Wen Qiang in his own memories. Yan Xinghe's eyeballs moved, and before he could react, the 6 firmament fire lotuses exploded simultaneously, turning into a sea of fire that instantly engulfed the netherworld sea and drowned everything. The netherworld sea realm that the two of them were in was completely destroyed, and the endless raging flames that rushed out seemed to have turned the netherworld sea into a world of flames. Yan Xinghe's body was drowned in the raging flames, never to be seen again. He rose to power in the ancient epoch, and he had dominated the world for his entire life. Among the past temple masters and cultivators of Taishu Temple, he was one of the people who had the greatest influence on Taishu Temple. The life of the second temple master of Taishu Temple, Yan Xinghe, had finally come to an end today. In the Sea of Fire, even Xiao Yin himself was forced to retreat. If he were to be swept into it, the consequences would be unimaginable. His void-returned dermic physique had already disappeared, and his original appearance was revealed. His face was extremely pale, and he was abnormally weak. The reddish-gold creation divine light had also disappeared. After Xiao Yin comprehended the mysteries of life and death of the great Tao, he never had a situation where he was exhausted like before. But the current him is extremely weak. Even the Tao of life and death, the Tao of life and death, made it difficult for him to recover. The apocalyptic scene in front of him was enough to prove the terrifying power of his attack just now. In the battle with Yan Xinghe, Xiao Yan, who had countered his opponent's attack, was already in an undefeatable position. There was no need for him to use such a method, and it even caused damage to his primordial spirit and dermic physique. However, Xiao Yan still did it in the end. He used the strongest attack that he could use with his current mystic powers. In the chaotic void, Xiao Yan's figure floated backward and landed directly on the red pillar of light that was like the center of the dark sea. The heavenly misfortune did not reject him. Instead, it was excited. Xiao Yan surveyed the dark sea, then turned to look at the red pillar of light formed by the power of the heavenly misfortune. His gaze lingered on it, and after a long while, Xiao Yan bowed solemnly toward the red pillar of light. Behind him, there were boundless exploding flames, and in the distance, there were thousands of terrifying calamities in the netherworld sea. This ultimate attack of Xiao Yan's even caused the netherworld sea domain at the center of the explosion to directly crack. At this moment, he had to rely on the power of the netherworld sea in order to gradually extinguish the world-destroying raging fire. As for when that terrifying domain crack would close, only the heavens knew. Xiao Yan sat down cross-legged, his eyes unfocused as he gazed into the void, as if searching for the untraceable world of the spirit sea. There, his master and junior brothers were also wrestling with others. The king of the underworld and Golden Cicada, who had retreated from the dark sea, had also gone to the spirit sea. In a sense, what Golden Cicada had said was true. The spirit sea was the decisive battlefield. But this did not mean that he would be of no use if he stayed in the dark sea and the boundless thousand domains. Silently, Xiao Yan sat cross-legged. After a long while, color gradually returned to his face, and his aura was no longer so weak. His figure began to naturally merge into the red pillar of light behind him, until it disappeared. The chaotic dark sea continued to rise and fall for a long time. Violent and ferocious disasters were everywhere. It should be said that this was the dark sea's most normal state. However, as time passed, and after an unknown amount of time, a sudden change occurred in the netherworld sea. It was as if an invisible barrier had suddenly appeared, dividing the dark sea into two parts. One side was calm and tranquil, while the other side was raging with raging waves, as if doomsday had arrived. An absurd and contradictory feeling appeared in the dark sea at this moment, but there was a strange sense of harmony. What was even stranger was that the calm area in the dark sea began to expand rapidly. More and more areas of the violent and restless dark sea began to calm down. And when Xiao Yan and the others started a great battle in the netherworld sea, in the profound sea, within the seawater, 10,000 zhang of golden light soared into the sky. Under the envelopment of the golden dragon's might and auspicious clouds, a huge sky dragon flew up from the bottom of the sea, circling above the 9 heavens. The golden heavenly dragon opened its mouth, and finally, 2 streams of light, one purple and one red, flew out. The streams of light intertwined in the void and turned into white light. In the white light, a door appeared and opened, leading to a mysterious world. The heavenly dragon flew in, and the door closed with a loud bang. After the heavenly dragon descended into the spirit sea world, it did not continue forward. Silently, it stayed where it was. The sound of the great Tao rang out incessantly. A terrifying sword scar appeared on the heavenly dragon's huge body. In the spirit sea world, the sword scar began to gradually heal. Chapter 1424. The giant golden dragon that entered the spirit sea world was the current leader of the dragon race, Yuan Dragon King. His body exuded a powerful demonic aura that far surpassed that of Kuan Dragon King and Shen Dragon King. However, his demonic aura seemed sluggish at the moment. There was a ghastly wound on the dragon's body that made one's heart go numb. The one who left such a wound on the current number 1 expert of the dragon race, one of the few powerhouses of Tianhuang mainland, was naturally Xian Li, who had fought with him previously. If he was in the Xian Sea, Yuan Dragon King wouldn't have been so severely injured. However, he had left the Xian Sea and descended into the vast Thousand World. Although he had received some of the power of the Xian Sea in time to strengthen himself, it was still not enough to withstand the power of the sky-crushing sword. Such a short time was not enough for Yuan Dragon King to recover, but he still came to the Spirit Sea. It was fine if he fought with others, but if he fought with opponents like Lin Feng, the Haotian Mirror, and the Sun Yudu, his current injury would be a huge flaw. However, Yuan Dragon King's expression was calm. After entering the Spirit Sea world, he silently stayed where he was and didn't move. The sound of the great Tao resonated in the world. Streamers of light hung down and wrapped around Yuan Dragon King's body. The sword wound actually started to heal. Although it wasn't fast, it was healing at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Apart from the sword wound, the sky-crushing sword will that was wreaking havoc in Yuan Dragon King's body was also gradually dissipating. The sword will seemed to be enraged and kept fighting against the light of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea. However, it was outnumbered and eventually dissolved. However, during this process, Yuan Dragon King wasn't having an easy time either. The light of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea and the sky-crushing sword will used his body as a battlefield. An intense and stalemate began. Every time they clashed, he felt like he was hit by another sword. Yuan Dragon King's expression was calm. He slowly closed his eyes. As the scales on his body opened and closed, a large amount of golden dragon aura surged out and covered his giant body. As the demonic power surged around him, he was also carefully analyzing the will of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea. He was even analyzing the terrifying sword will of the sky-crushing sword. This Spirit Sea can indeed heal the injuries caused by the sky-crushing sword. Yuan Dragon King nodded slightly. Although he had never personally entered the spiritual sea, he had a general understanding of it. Now that he had tested it, the effects were obvious. This was the reason why he dared to stay in the Divine Land, and not worry that he wouldn't be able to participate in the battle of the Spirit Sea. However, in the end, the Divine Prefecture still failed to achieve its goal. Even the Kuan Dragon King had fallen, leaving him with only regrets. At the same time, he had indeed fallen behind the others in the spiritual sea. It was hard to predict what kind of harvest he would get next. However, the Yuan Dragon King did not feel any regret. The Dragon Clan still had to try their best in the Divine Prefecture. Although he was arrogant, the Yuan Dragon King could also see the situation clearly. This was an extremely good opportunity, and if he missed it, it would be very difficult to get a better one in the future. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed in the end. But it was also because of this that the battle for the spiritual sea was even more important. In Crushing Sea, and Spirit Tao, and Sea Realm, Tao there, but Realm, was Dragon King Dragon, and of Dragon Emperor. In the void, invisible ribbons of light lit up, pulsing and vibrating. The two sides faintly formed a resonance, and after an unknown period of time, the entire sea of golden clouds suddenly trembled and began to converge toward the center. Within the golden auspicious clouds, two eyes opened. They were like stars, dignified and silent. A golden stream of light soared into the sky from the center of the auspicious clouds and flew into the distance. As the golden light traveled, it swept up the remaining golden auspicious clouds and disappeared. As King Yuan Dragon flew, he instantly traversed the boundless void. There was nothing in his Spirit Sea, and no matter where he was, the scenery was the same. It made people feel as if they had lost all sense of distance and direction. However, a small golden dot soon appeared in the Yuan Dragon King's vision. The speck of light expanded rapidly and turned into a giant golden lake. On the lakeside, there were a few figures in 2s and 3s. King Yuan Dragon's gaze became solemn. Although he hadn't left the mysterious sea for many years, everyone present recognized it. It was naturally impossible for him to not recognize the Great Void Temple's Great Void Nine Heavens Imperial Court, and the people of the Great Void Temple led by the Grand One Taoist Lord. Just over 20 years ago in the Great Thousand Worlds, he had fought with the Grand One Taoist Lord and the others. It was also in that conflict that he successfully obtained some precious treasures. After that, he cultivated in seclusion in the mysterious sea, and successfully went through the Middle Tribulation. He had benefited from it by recovering from his weakened state at a speed that exceeded everyone's expectations. However, at that time, no matter if it was his dragon clan or the Great Void Temple, neither of them would have predicted that the situation would turn into the current situation. The rise of the Heavenly Sect of Wonders, and the return of the Yudu clan to the Great Thousand World. Although it was King Yuan Dragon's first time seeing the Buddha with 48,000 arms and palms filled with stars, he knew that it was the future star-glazed Buddha Master. When the future Buddha Master was born, Golden Cicada became his disciple, and King Yuan Dragon's secret key to the Spirit Sea was taken from him by the dragon race. King Yuan Dragon could clearly feel that Golden Cicada had done it on purpose. More accurately, it was the future star-glazed Buddha Master who was behind Golden Cicada. King Yuan Dragon couldn't see through his intentions. His gaze fell on the future star-glazed Buddha Master as he scrutinized her. Everyone present naturally sensed King Yuan Dragon's arrival. The future star-glazed Buddha Master turned his head slightly and looked at Yuan Dragon King. His gaze was peaceful and natural, revealing nothing. Silently, Yuan Dragon King looked at him for a moment, then turned his gaze to the other side. There was a dark cloud floating there, and on it stood a humanoid figure. It was chaotic and blurry, so his original appearance couldn't be seen clearly. Only a rough outline could be seen. Yuan Dragon King recognized him. He was the rising powerhouse of Heaven Wasteland, the Enchantress. Previously, during the conflict between the dragon race and the Taishu Temple, the Enchantress had obtained some benefits by chance, allowing her to rise even more rapidly. Unfortunately, the current situation was even more difficult for her than the Yuan Dragon King. Yuan Dragon King wouldn't underestimate the Enchantress because of that. After all, whether it was him, the future star-glazed Buddha Master, or the others, it was all thanks to the Enchantress that they were able to enter the Spirit Sea. The fact that the Enchantress was able to stir up such a storm was already enough to make people look at her in a different light. Furthermore, the 12 dazzling light pillars that were faintly discernible in the dark cloud beneath the Enchantress's feet were clearly the 12 sacred sky brilliance array. Furthermore, the Enchantress had obviously gathered extremely high-quality materials to set up the array. Even so, it was much more difficult for the Heavenly Enchantment Great Sage to succeed compared to the others. What piqued the Yuan Dragon King's interest was that the mysterious origin of the Heavenly Charming Great Sage, which had been a mystery for thousands of years, was finally revealed. Before this, be it Yuan Dragon King, Kuan Dragon King, or even the entire Heaven Wasteland vast land, no one would have thought that the Enchantress was actually related to Yu Huang and Yu Ho. Thinking of the Yu Huang Heavenly Sea, Yuan Dragon King's eyes flashed with darkness. He looked at the lakeside, where a few Yuda beasts stood. Putting everything else aside, the Yudu beast in the lead caused Yuan Dragon King to narrow his eyes. Yudu's 12 Mirage sons, the current clan leader of the Yudu race, was also the current strongest powerhouse of the demon race. Even though Yuan Dragon King had successfully survived the second calamity after the war between the two worlds and recovered from his weakened state, he still felt pressure when facing the Mirage sons and Yudu. This would always remind him of the time when Yu Huang ruled over Heaven Wasteland. Even his dragon race had to pay tribute to her. After the war between the two worlds ended 4,000 years ago, Yu Huang had fallen, and the Yudu race had gone into hiding. His dragon race finally had a moment where they could hold their heads up high again. This was especially obvious when Yuan Dragon King had successfully entered the Middle Calamity. When the news spread out, It shook the entire heaven wasteland vast land, and the great heaven primordial world. It was a pity that at this time, the Mirage Sons and Yudu race returned to the Great Thousand Worlds. Although they weren't as powerful as Yuhuang back then, the Yudu race was still the strongest race in Heaven Wasteland vast land. The Mirage Sons and Yudu race also looked at Tenryugen and nodded slightly. They didn't say anything and turned their gaze back to the Golden Lake. Yuan Dragon King's expression was calm, and he didn't say anything either. Other than the people of Taishu Temple, the Enchantress, future Constellation Glaze Buddha Lord, and the Yudu race, there was also a monkey standing beside the lake. He was scratching his ears and cheeks. Just like the Mirage Sons and Yudu, his gaze was fixed on the center of the lake. Yuan Dragon King had never met this monkey before, but he recognized him. He was the Myriad Law's heart monkey that would create a huge commotion every time he appeared. Yuan Dragon King's gaze followed the monkey and Mirage Sons and Yudu's gazes, and landed at the center of the lake. He had already seen the changes there at the first moment, but only at the last moment did he start to size it up seriously. In the center of the lake, there was a huge whirlpool. A golden disc floated, and a few people were sitting on it. Yuan Dragon King wasn't interested in the others. His attention was on two figures, one standing and one sitting. They were two figures that looked exactly the same. One had long hair, and was dressed in purple. One was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, and the other was leisurely holding a huge black umbrella. When he saw Yuan Dragon King, there was a smile that was not a smile on his face as he looked over Yuan Dragon King and he looked at each other. Strictly speaking, this was their first real meeting. However, Yuan Dragon King valued this person more than Mirage Sons and Yudu. This was because this person had defeated him in the war between the two worlds. At the same time, not long ago, this person had used the tricks that he had left in the boundless world to defeat him again, forcing him to return to the mysterious sea. The master of Xianmen Tianzong, Lin Feng. Yuan Dragon King looked at Lin Feng and the primordial golden lamp. He seemed to have understood something. In the fight for the spirit sea, this person seemed to have the upper hand again. At this moment, the others could only watch helplessly from the side. Yuan Dragon King's gaze landed on the huge umbrella in Lin Feng's hands. Chapter 1425. Yuan Dragon King stared at the heaven-covering umbrella in Lin Feng's hands. At that moment, the heaven-covering umbrella looked ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. However, at the tip of the umbrella, there was an existence that looked like a small black pagoda. Streams of black light flowed out of it, and rolled on the surface of the umbrella. They transformed into blurry air currents that looked like chaos. Yuan Dragon King looked at the heaven-covering umbrella, and then at Tao Venerable Supreme One, Mirage Sun Yudu, Future Star Glazed Buddha Master, and the others. His gaze landed on the Nine Heavens Imperial Court where the people of Taishu Temple were. Then, his gaze shifted downwards to look at the surface of the giant golden lake, where the people of Taishu Temple were. As expected, under the lake, there was a bright mirror light. There were even streams of great Tao light connected to it. As time passed, the mirror light became brighter and brighter. Yuan Dragon King was expressionless. When he saw this, he knew that the Haotian mirror was rapidly recovering to its perfect state. Its power and aura were rising rapidly. Like Mirage Sun Yudu, Yuan Dragon King had complicated feelings about the Haotian mirror. If the dragon race hated the Qin dynasty because of the ancestral dragon, they hated the Taishu Temple just as much. The Haotian mirror played a huge role in the fall of Juehuang Xianshang. And the reason why the Void Temple was able to stand tall for thousands of years, and exist until now is all thanks to the clear sky mirror suppressing the mountain gate. Before the war between the two worlds started, it was still unknown when the Yudu race would return to the Kiliacosm. There were three decisive factors in the situation of the great heaven primordial world. When would Lin Feng succeed in sealing the heaven-punishing sword for the second time? When would the Haotian mirror recover to its perfect state? Could Yuan Dragon King, who had successfully survived the calamity, increase his power to the point where he could unify Heaven Wasteland before the first two happened? After that, the war between the two worlds broke out early. The people of Taishu Temple and the Haotian mirror unexpectedly entered the Xianhai Sea and fought with the dragon race. Due to some factors, the dragon race even had the chance to keep the Haotian Mirror, Dao Venerable Supreme One, and the others in the Xianhai Sea forever. But in the end, because of Lin Feng's heaven-shocking four swords, he failed on the verge of success. However, at this moment, the Origin Dragon King could only watch as the Haotian Mirror recovered completely. He even hoped that it would recover before Lin Feng obtained control over the spiritual sea. Even though the Yuan Dragon King had lived for countless years, he still felt very conflicted at this moment. Yuan Dragon King didn't make a move to interfere. From the looks of it, one could tell that the Haotian Mirror, Sun Mirage Yudu, future constellation Glazed Buddha Master, Monkey, the Enchantress, and the others had most likely tried, but they still couldn't stop Lin Feng. Therefore, they could only wait for the Haotian Mirror to recover. Although the Yuan Dragon King was proud, he didn't think that he could accomplish something that so many powerhouses couldn't do alone. After all, this wasn't the Xianhai. He couldn't even draw upon the power of the Xianhai. Xianmen Tianzong, who was under the command of the mysterious Gate Master Lin Feng, had already become the strongest power in the Great Heaven primordial world, regardless of whether it was the human race or the demon race. His spiritual sea had been refined by Lin Feng, which was something unimaginable. At this moment, the Yuan Dragon King and everyone else became natural allies. What they needed now was the perfect Haotian Mirror to try and break through Lin Feng's heaven-covering umbrella. The Yuan Dragon King gave a long roar and suddenly rushed into the sky. He transformed into a beam of golden light and pounced towards Lin Feng and the others in the center of the lake. He didn't think that he could win against everyone, but he wanted to try it himself. Only then would he know what was going on with Lin Feng's heaven-covering umbrella. He wanted to know his enemy as well as himself. The golden dragon clouds covered the sky and descended towards Lin Feng's head. Lin Feng, who was under the big black umbrella, smiled and didn't say anything. A huge golden dragon claw reached out from the clouds and grabbed the surface of the heaven-covering umbrella. Compared to the huge body of Yuan Dragon King, the seemingly small heaven-covering umbrella twisted time and space. It seemed boundless, and Yuan Dragon King's dragon claw seemed to have fallen into a chaotic ocean. The chaos was stirred up by Yuan Dragon King as he tried to break it. However, the terrifying power was continuously dispelled by the chaotic currents, making it difficult for Yuan Dragon King to take even half a step forward. Sun Mirage Yudu, who was on the shore of the huge lake, silently launched an attack towards Lin Feng. However, it was blocked by the heaven-covering umbrella. The attack wasn't very strong, but Yuan Dragon King could see through it. Sun Mirage Yudu's demon power divine art seemed to land on the heaven-covering umbrella at the same time. But it was as if they were in different universes of chaos. They didn't work together as they spread out in the chaos. I see. No wonder so many people couldn't break through the magic power restriction of this strange umbrella. No wonder we had to wait for the Haotian Mirror to recover completely. Yuan Dragon King had already achieved his goal, so he didn't continue fighting. He flew up again and hovered above the lake. He looked at the center of the lake, at the primordial golden lamp, which was in the whirlpool silently. He looked at this strange scene where movement and stillness were interwoven and balanced. He looked at Lin Feng and the others on the primordial golden lamp. Yuan Dragon King was hidden in the golden clouds, which descended to a corner of the lake. There he fell into silence. No one knew what Yuan Dragon King was thinking, but it was a difficult decision for the proud dragon race to watch the Haotian Mirror recover completely and surround Lin Feng with the others. No one said anything though. Silently they waited. In a way, this was because Lin Feng now had the right to do so. Lin Feng held the bulwark umbrella with a faint smile on his face. His gaze swept across the Yuan Dragon King and the others, but he didn't say anything. Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, Yu Hongyan, Yang Qing, and the others also looked calm. They sat cross-legged on the primordial golden lamp and surrounded Lin Feng's real body. White Tiger Great Sage stared coldly at the Yuda beasts, but his emotions were calm. He lay at the side. Everyone's hearts trembled slightly. Suddenly, they saw the void in the distance tremble slightly, and a figure stepped out from it. It was a young man wearing a black dragon robe and a crown. He looked dignified. When he saw this person, Wang Lin's gaze flickered, and Lin Feng raised his eyebrows. Zhu Yi Yu Hongyan, and Yang Qing also recognized this person. It was the king of the underworld, who had disappeared without a trace. Although he had changed from a youth to a young man, there was no mistaking him. The underworld emperor appeared on the other side of the giant golden lake, relatively far away from the Void Temple, standing across the lake, his expression indifferent as he looked at everything in front of him, his gaze shifting back and forth between Lin Feng and the others and the clear sky mirror under the lake. Although he didn't make a move like Yuan Dragon King, after observing for a while, he seemed to understand what was going on. The king of the underworld, who stood there quietly, didn't have any expression on his face. It was hard to guess what he was thinking. When he looked at the golden lake and the Haotian mirror, he didn't hide the dazzling brilliance in his eyes. When they saw the king of the underworld, the expressions of everyone in Taishu Temple changed. Even the usually calm Tai Daoist lord furrowed his snow-white eyebrows. He closed his eyes and stared at the king of the underworld. One of the monumental figures in the history of Taishu Temple, the second temple master Yan Xinghe, had been refined into an evil spirit by the king of the underworld. This was an unprecedented humiliation for Taishu Temple. In today's world, from an emotional point of view, the king of the underworld was the person that Taishu Temple hated the most. Other than Tai Daoist Lord, Shoichi Dashin, Dao Lord Xianyi Lin Daohan, and all the other cultivators of Taishu Temple who had entered the spiritual sea were staring at the king of the underworld with ice-cold expressions. Slowly Tai Daoist Lord retracted his gaze and said, "Don't lose sight of the bigger picture." Lin Daohan fell silent for a while, and also retracted his gaze. Returning the Haotian mirror to its peak is undoubtedly the most important thing. No matter what we do, as long as the Haotian mirror returns to its peak state, we'll be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Slowly, the others nodded as well. Shoichi Dashin glanced at the king of the underworld. His injuries have fully recovered, and his mystical powers have also grown tremendously since the last time he appeared. It feels like he's already nearing the peak state that was recorded in the ancient epic. Perhaps he has truly returned to his peak state. Tai Daoist Lord said, "Calm your mind. First, the spiritual sea. The outcome of the battle for the spiritual sea might decide the future direction of the entire heaven primal world." Lin Daohan and the others nodded in agreement. As for the king of the underworld, he took the initiative to land at a spot furthest from Taishu Temple. Clearly, he did not want to clash with Taishu Temple at this time. The future star-glazed Buddha Lord calmly watched the Yuan Dragon King and the king of the underworld arrive, and chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice. Those who had the ability to participate had all arrived. Those who should be here had all arrived. Now there was only one thing left, and that was when the Haotian mirror could return to its peak state, whether it could be a step faster than Lin Feng, whether it could return to its peak state before Lin Feng refined the spiritual sea, and whether it could break through Lin Feng's heaven-shielding umbrella. For a moment, the scene fell into silence again. On the primordial golden lamp, Lin Feng held the umbrella and had a smile on his face as he transmitted his voice to his disciples. Tianhao has also arrived at the spiritual sea, but he hasn't come near us. According to him, Golden Cicada has also entered, but that old cicada most likely doesn't dare to come near now. Sure, Tianhao didn't go near to prevent Lin Feng and the others from giving Sun Mirage, Yudu, Taishu Temple, and the others a chance to rescue him. Although he had the Sky City, the Blue Sky All Heavens Formation, and the Great Wheel of Heavens, there were many strong practitioners in the spiritual sea. Now that Xianmen Tianzong had become the target of everyone, if he rashly barged in, if Lin Feng couldn't rescue him in time, it would be easy for him to fall into the hands of others. As for Golden Cicada, he had entered the spiritual sea, but he was nowhere to be seen. Naturally, he was hiding from the monkey, lest he destroy the cooperation that they had painstakingly formed. When Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others heard this, they didn't show it on their faces. Their attention was also focused on the lake on the other side. There, the light of the Haotian mirror became more and more mysterious, and its connection with the great Tao of heaven and earth became more and more intimate. On the other hand, the area of the giant golden lake had shrunk a lot compared to the beginning, and the lake water had also decreased greatly. Everyone's expression was solemn. But when the giant golden lake completely disappeared, It also meant that Lin Feng's refinement of the spiritual sea had come to an end. Even if he couldn't completely control the spiritual sea, he had achieved a great momentum that was difficult to reverse. Chapter 1426. Everyone was paying attention to the process of Lin Feng refining the spiritual sea, and the recovery speed of the Haotian mirror. On the primeval golden lamp, Lin Feng, who had been meditating with his eyes closed, slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were flashing with infinite brilliance. Looking into Lin Feng's eyes, it was as if they could see the infinite creation world going from creation to destruction, and then the creation of another world. The brilliance of the great path in the spiritual sea scattered down and fell on Lin Feng's body, making him seem to be shrouded in light, but his whole body was clear. His body seemed to have disappeared, and he himself was like the gathering of thousands of brilliance of the great path in the spiritual sea. This state made him seem to have no secrets, but it was completely unpredictable, difficult to guess and difficult to describe. No one knew that at this moment, in Lin Feng's sea of consciousness, a huge Tai Chi diagram was constantly rotating. On the Tai Chi diagram, there was another true spirit pattern corresponding to it. That true spirit formation pattern at this time shockingly split into two, and was even dyed with a black and white radiance. One black and one white, illuminating the space within Lin Feng's sea of consciousness, contrasting with the Tai Chi diagram below. Countless great path mysteries manifested into layers of illusory light shadows, constantly fluctuating in the void. As they intertwined with each other, they began to break the chaos of heaven and earth, showing the state of flowing earth, water, fire, and wind. The earth, water, fire, and wind were re-established, and the clear and turbid chi separated, rising and sinking. Then between heaven and earth, they evolved into a world of their own. One world after another appeared, and then passed through the vicissitudes of time, gradually declining, and finally going to destruction, everything returning to peace. In the destruction of the void, a new world of creation was born. The cycle repeated, as if it was revealing the true meaning and mystery of eternity, and the light shadows manifested by the great path became more and more complete. Later, in Lin Feng's sea of consciousness, there seemed to be the brilliance of the great path, condensing as if it were real, as if another world of the spiritual sea was manifested. In this world, there was a huge Tai Chi diagram, which was rotating slowly. Slowly, the rotation became slower and slower, gradually showing signs of stagnation. At some point in time, the image of a large bell suddenly appeared on the Tai Chi diagram. Amidst the melodious and mighty bell chimes, the bell gradually changed shape, turning into a huge pitch-black stone door. Its surface was covered with thousands of relief carvings of scenes. Amidst the ancient desolation, it exuded a strong aura of life. A muffled sound rang out from the gate, and it slowly opened. A formless river flowed out from within. The river flowed without stopping, neither fast nor slow, but it seemed to contain a power that would never stop. It was the river of time. An old man sat upright on the surface of the river of time. He had a thin appearance, and his entire body seemed extremely old. He seemed to be on the verge of death, and he seemed as if he would arrive at the end of his life and leave this world at any moment. Only that pair of eyes revealed a completely different scene. In that pair of eyes, one could see the innocence and liveliness of a baby, the brightness and sharpness of a youth, and at the same time, the vicissitudes of a middle-aged man and a trace of tiredness, but also like an old man, calm and serene. Moreover, there was a faint deathly stillness within it, without the slightest hint of life. All of this appeared at the same time in the eyes of the old man. They blended together, clear and distinct, but also merged into one, difficult to separate. Time quietly passed. Within Lin Feng's sea of consciousness, it was as if an unknown change was currently occurring. On the surface, the current Lin Feng, who was enveloped by the light, seemed to be more mysterious and difficult to fathom, but compared to before, there didn't seem to be much difference. Lin Feng's eyes were as calm as still water. He seemed to have sensed something and looked into the distance. The bright mirror light under the lake became more and more dazzling. As the mirror light changed, the great Tao of heaven and earth in the spiritual sea seemed to tremble at the same time. Suddenly, The ribbons of light that connected the edge of the Haotian mirror suddenly broke apart. The dazzling mirror light disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if it had suddenly been extinguished. Seeing this, Lord Tai, Shoichi Dashin, Lord Xianyi, Lin Daohan, and the other cultivators of the Taishu temple became spirited. In the next instant, the entire world of the spiritual sea began to shake violently. Following that, the entire colossal world outside the spiritual sea began to shake. Everyone in the divine land and the vast infinite land could clearly feel it. The great sage and Zhu Yan great sage, who had finally escaped back to the divine abyss mountain range, did not even have time to calm down before their expressions changed slightly. In the Wutong forest, the phoenix great sage stood on a giant divine Wutong tree with a calm expression. She had transformed into her human form, and the Wutong tree emperor, who looked like an old man, stood beside her. It was hard to tell whether she was happy or worried. Shenlong King, who had returned to the mysterious sea, wore an extremely solemn expression and did not speak for a long time. In the Blackboard realm, Green Peak Yudu looked into the void with a similarly solemn expression. He stood still on the spot like a statue. On the White Cloud Mountain in the Divine Land, Kuang Heng and the other cultivators of the Taishu temple who were guarding the place were also greatly shocked. After defeating the 3 Doomsday Great Demons, Gu Jun, Sword Lord Tiangang, Xian Longsheng, and Shi Xingyun stood on the vast infinite land and looked into the void in the distance without any focus. Their hearts were filled with complex emotions. They looked at each other, but didn't say anything. The heaven-opening sword in Xian Longsheng's hand and the longevity lotus in Gu Jun's hand were also shaking at this moment. Meanwhile, on the coast of the East Sea in the Divine Land, a cold woman sat cross-legged in the void. She raised her head and looked into the sky. Her gaze was more accurate than anyone else's. The void in that direction seemed to be gradually lighting up, and a mirror-like light was faintly discernible. Xianli looked in that direction with a cold gaze that was full of hostility. Slowly, the corners of her lips curled up on her usually cold and expressionless face, revealing an extremely faint smile. However, the smile looked extremely cold. Similar to the outside world, in the spiritual sea, whether it was Lin Feng's imperial palace in the Yin and Yang life and death formation, Zhu Yi's golden Permitha bridge, or the king of the underworld's book of life and death, all of them were reacting and trembling at this moment. Even the future star-glazed Buddha master's head was faintly showing a huge pagoda that was trembling non-stop. Sun Mirage, Yudu the Yuanlong king, and the enchantress looked normal, but everyone's gaze was clearly extremely complicated, and countless thoughts were flashing through their minds. The monkey, who had always been lawless, had a slightly solemn expression on his face. He put his hands behind his back and blinked his eyes. His gaze was serious and solemn, but it was also eager to try and was extremely restless. Under the heaven-shrouding umbrella, Lin Feng and his disciples' expressions also became serious. There was naturally only one reason for such a commotion. The Haotian mirror, the creation treasure that was born in the boundless world. The #1 treasure in the history of the great heaven primordial world, before the heaven-punishing sword appeared for the second time. At this moment, it had finally recovered to its perfect state and returned to its peak. The sun of the great Kiliacosm had reappeared in front of the world, shaking the 9 heavens and 10 earths. At this moment, the Haotian mirror seemed to have disappeared without a trace. However, everyone could feel that there seemed to be an invisible existence above the heads of the people in the Taishu temple. Although there was no light and no energy waves coming from it, that invisible existence was something that everyone couldn't ignore. What was even more bizarre was that although everyone could feel that invisible existence, they had another feeling in their hearts, as if the treasure wasn't there at all. It wasn't above the heads of the people in the Taishu temple, but it wasn't in any other part of the world either. It was hard to describe its existence and determine its location, but it seemed to be everywhere. It was truly everywhere, encompassing everything. Every point of space-time, every line, every surface, every domain, it was there. Although its existence was difficult to understand, everyone knew that it was the Haotian mirror. At its peak, the Haotian mirror's true form, Lord Tai sat in the 9 heavens of the Taishu temple. Without any nonsense, he formed a spell with both hands. Behind him, Lin Daohan did the same. In the world of the Spirit Sea, the light of the Great Path became brighter. Then, space-time suddenly exploded with an indescribable and mysterious light. This light filled all directions, covering the entire world, and then concentrated on one point, falling straight onto Lin Feng's bulwark umbrella. It was a contradictory feeling, but at this moment, it perfectly appeared on the Haotian mirror. The seemingly calm mirror light fell on the surface of the bulwark umbrella, and the chaotic air currents on the surface of the umbrella suddenly became sluggish. The surging sea of chaos seemed to be frozen in place at this moment. The chaotic air was like a solid object, losing its vitality, power, and mysteries. Above the bulwark umbrella, the chaotic domain that covered the sky and space-time was no longer insurmountable. Instead, it was like ordinary fog, dust, or dirt. Under the umbrella, Zhu Yi Wanglin and the others saw this scene and muttered to themselves, "So this is the Haotian mirror." This was the Haotian mirror. Sun Mirage, Yudu, Yuan Dragon King, and the others all sighed softly, but their movements didn't slow down. The moment the Haotian mirror froze the bulwark umbrella, everyone present attacked together. This time, their attacks were like lightning that pierced through the clouds, passing through the chaotic domain formed by the bulwark umbrella. The chaotic air roiled, but after it dispersed, it couldn't gather again. It lost its ability to block everyone's attacks. Countless violent attacks attacked Lin Feng under the umbrella at the same time. The power was enough to destroy heaven and earth, and it was enough to make people's hearts palpitate. Zhu Yi Wanglin and the others took deep breaths. Their faces were fearless, and they all stood up, ready to fight. They saw Lin Feng wave his hand at them. Lin Feng's true self, who had been sitting cross-legged all this time, suddenly stood up. The countless lights in his eyes suddenly disappeared. The Tai Chi diagram in his sea of consciousness completely stopped spinning, and the two true spirit god patterns fell into the black and white eyes of the Tai Chi diagram. Next, the Tai Chi diagram suddenly reversed. Chapter 1427. Under the illumination of the Haotian mirror, even the indestructible concept of the heaven-shrouding umbrella, the seemingly endless chaos, was frozen by the mirror light, losing its previous profoundness. Other than the people from Taishu Temple, the other strong practitioners all attacked Lin Feng, and the others under the umbrella. The monkey's usual relaxed expression disappeared. Although he didn't show any fear, he became solemn, and hesitation appeared in his eyes. He didn't attack Lin Feng with the others. Instead, his gaze shifted between Lin Feng and the future star-glazed Buddha Master. He seemed hesitant. It was because of the future star-glazed Buddha Master that he couldn't find Golden Cicada. Although the future Buddha Master hadn't shown his true strength, the monkey could feel how strong he was. However, this wasn't a reason for him to cower. Back then, Jihuang Xinyuan had been stronger, and the monkey had still dared to rebel. However, if Lin Feng controlled the Spirit Sea, the situation in the heaven primordial world would change drastically. However, he didn't want to attack Lin Feng with the others. He had seen that the heaven-shrouding umbrella was unbreakable, so he was excited. Now that the heaven-shrouding umbrella was restrained by the Haotian mirror, the monkey wasn't willing to attack. But other than the monkey, the others didn't hold back. Yuan Dragon King was also proud and didn't like to work with others, but this opponent was too special. Thus, with a mighty dragon roar, Yuan Dragon King's huge body appeared from the golden dragon might auspicious clouds. He aimed his head in the direction of Lin Feng and the primordial golden lamp. He opened his mouth, and a brilliant and vigorous golden light spewed towards Lin Feng. Mirage Sun Yuda did the same. The horn on his head flashed, and thousands of runes appeared. An even more terrifying black light broke through the void from the heart of his brows. It also pierced through the chaotic world that was fixed in place by the Haotian mirror's light, and shot towards Lin Feng. Future star-glazed Buddha Master chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice, and then an enormous pagoda appeared above him. The pagoda was square in shape, and each side was 48,000 m wide and tall. It had a total of 7 levels, and there were 48,000 relics that illuminated the heavens and the earth. At this moment, the sky-piercing pagoda had shockingly attained creation, and it was no longer the embryonic form of the future Lord Buddha that had just been born. Instead, it was a true creation magic treasure, and it was a precious treasure of the Grand Tao that could be compared to Mount Meru in the past. This was a ritual set up by the Buddha. After all the great opportunities had gathered, it would accompany the future Master Buddha to be born. Together, they would fight for a chance for the Buddhism in the Dharma-ending era to return to the righteous path. Future star-glazed Buddha Lord's 400,000 arms supported the towering pagoda together, and boundless light surged from it. Then the sky-piercing pagoda pressed down on Lin Feng's head. The sky above Xianmen Tianzong and the others instantly darkened. It wasn't just a simple change in light and darkness, but it was a feeling that their future and destiny were without light and light. It was so heavy that it was difficult to increase, and it was as if they were facing an endless tribulation. Without the heaven shade umbrella to block them, under the endless tribulation, everyone had a feeling that it was difficult to resist. Tribulation after tribulation descended, and it stripped away everyone's magic power and divine abilities, stripped away the tranquility in their hearts, and stripped away all sorts of miracles. It was as if life had lost its color. In the future, what awaited them was nothing but tribulation after tribulation, which was difficult to calculate like the number of stars in the sky. Among the various Buddhist techniques, the strongest battle divine abilities, no matter if it was the Vairocana palm or the Buddhist kingdom in the palm, were the ultimate techniques of the present Buddha, Gautama Buddha. The Eastern future Buddha and the future star-glazed Buddha Lord were all proficient in these ultimate techniques. And this ultimate technique was a top-notch great divine art of Buddhism that had only appeared in this world after the future Buddha Lord had been born. The future constellation's infinite calamity. When this technique was executed, under the support of the sky-piercing pagoda, it wasn't ferocious, but it was extremely majestic. It was a profound power that made one feel that it was hard to resist, and it made all the strong practitioners who were on the same side as the future Buddha Lord feel apprehensive. The future constellation-glazed Buddha Lord, however, had a calm expression. Ever since he had entered the Spirit Sea, he had not made a move, but this time, he had used his full strength. He didn't seem to consider preserving his strength at all, and he didn't consider whether there would be a fight for the Spirit Sea after everyone defeated Lin Feng. It was as if he wanted to finish this battle in one fell swoop, and he only wanted to defeat Lin Feng and Xianmen Tianzong. He didn't want anything else. This scene was naturally something that the others were happy to see. But even so, when the future constellation-glazed Buddha Lord truly revealed his strength at this moment, it still made everyone's expression turn solemn. Even the Sun Mirage Yudu frowned. The eyes of the Enchantress and the King of the Underworld flickered slightly, and they didn't attack together with the future constellation-glazed Buddha Lord, the Sun Mirage Yudu, and the Yuanlong King. However, their gazes were fixed on Lin Feng, who was facing this terrifying attack. Their demonic power and magic power fluctuated faintly, accumulating power, and waiting to be unleashed at any moment. The terrifying attack that covered the sky and earth gave rise to waves of mournful cries of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea. It was sharp and mournful, and it was deafening. The rays of light that were condensed from the marvelous principles of the great Tao of heaven and earth shattered continuously at this moment. The Spirit Sea shook, and there was even a faint feeling of rejection. At this moment, Lin Feng's main body stood up from the primordial golden lamp, and he looked at the violent attack that covered the sky and earth in front of him. His face was like a calm lake, without any ripples. At this moment, the Taiji diagram in his consciousness went silent, and then it started to circulate again. However, this time it was reversing. As the Taiji diagram reversed, its center started to collapse, and it caused the entire Taiji diagram to shrink towards that point in the middle. It was as if yin and yang had returned to one. Affected by this, the other lights and shadows or bands of light that were condensed from the concepts in Lin Feng's consciousness were also swept towards that point, and all of them fell into that point. Everything was affected by this, and all things returned to one. In Lin Feng's consciousness, other than that point, there was nothing else. There was no time, no space, no yin and yang, no hot and cold, no fast and slow, no light and dark. There was no concept of space, and there was no way to differentiate up and down. There was no concept of time, and there was no way to differentiate the past and the future. Whether it was alive or not, they all disappeared at this moment. They no longer existed, and they wouldn't be born again. Everything returned to that point. It was as if it was the starting point of all things, the most primordial point. Starting from this point, everything else evolved. When everything returned to one, only this point remained. It was indescribable, and it was impossible to fathom. It was impossible to describe its size, its shape, and its position. It was impossible to guess what this point was made of. It was mysterious within mysteries, the beginning of chaos. This point was Lin Feng's Tao fruit. He had successfully taken the last step of merging with the void and condensing his own Tao fruit. At this moment, after Lin Feng took the last step, the world in front of him was no longer the same. When that point suddenly changed, chaos appeared, giving birth to thousands of great Taos. The primordial world opened, and all things were created. With a thought from Lin Feng, the world of creation and the primordial point became one. There was no distinction between front and back, past and future. Thousands of great Taos gathered at one point, and that point was the creation of the world. Lin Feng's clone holding the heaven-shrouding umbrella disintegrated into 3 rays of light, which turned back into the Brontosaurus clone, the Nine-Chi clone, and the divine god of battle clone. The Nine-Chi clone stood still, while the Brontosaurus clone and the divine god of battle clone ignored the doomsday that their opponent had created. Instead, they sat down with their legs crossed. The rays of light landed on the Brontosaurus clone and the divine god of battle clone, continuing the process of refining Lin Feng's spiritual ocean. The Nine-Chi clones caught the heaven-shrouding umbrella, while Lin Feng's main body left the primordial golden lamp and flew out from under the heaven-shrouding umbrella. He did not move, but an indescribable dot suddenly appeared in the void in front of him. The dot did not make any noise, nor did it emit any energy ripples. However, as soon as it appeared, everything around it began to collapse toward the dot. It was as if it was the beginning of everything, but also the end of everything. It existed regardless of distance or time. It could contain all tangible and intangible things. Even the seemingly endless spiritual qi in the spiritual sea was gathering towards this point at this moment. The light of the great path was like rivers flowing into the sea, flowing towards this point. The destructive golden light released by the primordial dragon king twisted slightly in front of the dot, as if it was resisting something. However, after a short pause, it merged into the dot and disappeared without a trace. No matter how much noise there was before, no matter how terrifying the might was, it was all calm at this moment. It disappeared without a trace, not even the slightest ripple could be seen. The even more powerful mysterious black light from the mirage sun of Yudu stopped in front of the dot and kept twisting, causing the surrounding heaven and earth to be destroyed. However, in the blink of an eye, the mysterious black light also melted into the dot. One could vaguely see that the terrifying black light was divided into thousands of strands, which continued to thin until it completely disappeared. The terrifying traces of the golden light and the mysterious black light still remained in the void. Time and space were annihilated. However, at this moment, everything had disappeared without a trace. Everything seemed to have returned to the beginning, as if it had never existed. Meanwhile, the boundless calamity of the future constellation that the future star-glazed Buddha Master had executed, the endless calamity that severed the future, all poured into the dot. The endless calamity disappeared without a trace, and the time and space of the future returned to normal. Creation changed, and everything continued as usual. It was full of variables, unknowns, and infinite possibilities. When the future star-glazed Buddha Master saw this, his eyes lit up. It wasn't dazzling and dazzling. Instead, it revealed a sense of calmness and extinction. He suddenly stretched out his palm, and after the boundless calamity of the future constellation, he executed the great divine art of the kingdom of Buddha in the palm. This divine art wasn't used to attack Lin Feng, but to envelop the heavenly tower pagoda. If not for that, the heavenly tower pagoda would have been swallowed by Lin Feng's Tao fruit along with the boundless calamity of the future constellation. When they saw this, be it the mirage son of Yudu, the primordial dragon king, the enchantress, the king of the underworld, or the people in the 9 heavens of Supreme, they were all shaken. Their gazes became unprecedentedly solemn. Chapter 1428. The future star-glazed Buddha master had temporarily stabilized the sky-reaching pagoda. However, his figure was also fixed in the void because of that. The future star-glazed Buddha master raised his eyes to look at Lin Feng, and there was light flashing in his eyes. Countless seemingly illusory yet real rays of light interweaved within them, forming nodes that extended continuously. The lines were like an inescapable net, and the dots were like endless starlight. At that moment, everything seemed to be dissected clearly in his eyes. Sun Mirage Yudu and the others frowned, and their powers surged. In the eyes of the future star-glazed Buddha master, it was as if they were covered in a layer of darkness. It was either light or heavy, thin or thick. However, other than the Haotian mirror that seemed to exist everywhere, and yet be traceless, other existences would still have light shining through even if they were covered in the thickest layer of darkness. Only the future star-glazed Buddha master's gaze was focused on Lin Feng, who was different from the rest. There was nothing covering his body, and there was no darkness covering him. He seemed to be normal. However, in the eyes of the future star-glazed Buddha master, it was as if Lin Feng didn't exist at all. There was only one spot in his line of sight. Not to mention karma and fate, he couldn't even describe his position and image. Lin Feng raised his head to look at the future star-glazed Buddha master and smiled. He looked around, and his gaze swept past Yuan Dragon King, king of the underworld, and monkey. In the end, he looked back at the future Buddha master and said with a smile, "Thanks for the trouble, Dao friend. It's a pity I can't let you have it, so please wait patiently." After saying that, Lin Feng stopped looking at the future star-glazed Buddha master and turned to walk toward Yuan Dragon King. Yuan Dragon King's pupils contracted slightly, but he realized that he couldn't pinpoint Lin Feng's exact location. This feeling was rather familiar, because there was a similar existence beside him. At that moment, Lin Feng was like a Haotian mirror. It was as if he resided in all space-time and was everywhere. He seemed to be taking a step forward, but he had already appeared in front of the Yuan Dragon King. He said indifferently, "I said that if you dare to take a step out of the mysterious sea, I will kill you. Could it be that you have become bolder because I don't have a sword in my hand?" As he said that, Lin Feng pointed his index and middle fingers at Yuan Dragon King like a sword. Inside his spiritual sea, he didn't activate the heaven-punishing sword aura. However, as he stabbed out with his finger, the tip of the sword seemed to pierce through something, causing the air to distort. There seemed to be something expanding from that point, and it continued to expand. Lin Feng himself was still hard to fathom, hard to speculate, but the point of his finger changed. That indescribable shape, that point whose position could not be defined, turned into layers of chaos. The chaos broke apart, the universe appeared, and time, space, distance, and proximity were re-established. The sword light was mysterious and unpredictable. It gathered thousands of light streams and stabbed toward Yuan Dragon King's forehead. It was as if the great Tao of his spirit sea had transformed into the sword in Lin Feng's hand. The sword light was mysterious and unpredictable. It gathered thousands of light streams and stabbed toward Yuan Dragon King's forehead. It looked as if the great Tao of his spirit sea had transformed into the sword in Lin Feng's hand at that moment. Lin Feng waved his hand casually and stabbed out with the sword. The entire spirit sea trembled. The vast and boundless spirit chi also attached to the surface of the light streams of the great Tao, and turned into the tip of a sword that stabbed toward Yuan Dragon King. The Yuan Dragon King felt that he had no way to avoid this sword strike. Although the tangible sword light seemed to only be a point from Lin Feng's fingertip, at this moment, sword chi and sword intent were everywhere. They were everywhere, and there were no openings that could be missed. Yuan Dragon King let out a long roar. As the scales on his body opened and closed, a large amount of golden dragon might surged out. Golden light shone brightly. Many bright stars emerged from within and merged with the golden light. They turned into a golden river that twined around his body. Yuan Dragon King flew into the air. His huge body turned into a beam of golden light that traversed between heaven and earth. He didn't dodge or retreat. Instead, he attacked Lin Feng in a straight line. There was sword chi in all directions. Lin Feng seemed to be everywhere. If he retreated now, he would be chased until he died. If he fought head-on, he would have a chance. At least, he wouldn't die a worthless death. Yuan Dragon King had been keeping a low profile all these years. But in reality, after the war between the two realms 4,000 years ago, he had always been regarded as the strongest among the demons living in the vast 1,000 domains. They were all in the Dharma-ending realm. Whether it was the leader of the primordial demonic ape clan, the great sage of the Phoenix clan, the great sage of the Phoenix clan, the Kunlun Dragon King, the missing great sage of the Golden Cicada, or the rising star the Enchantress, none of them were a match for him. During that era, only a monkey whose whereabouts were unknown and rarely appeared was considered a match for him. After successfully going through the intermediate tribulation, he should have embarked on a brand new path. He should have seen a brand new situation and written a brand new chapter in the future. But to Yuan Dragon King, ever since he went through the intermediate tribulation, he had been depressed. Especially since the war between the two realms, he had been extremely vexed. The biggest reason for this was the person in front of him. Yuan Dragon King had to face this in today's battle. If he continued to endure, he would really have no way out. Amidst the deafening dragon roar, Yuan Dragon King turned into a beam of golden light and charged straight at Lin Feng. Wherever the golden light passed, even the void of the spiritual sea was shattered. Within the golden light, layers of light shadows could be vaguely seen. It was as if there was a world within the light shadows. A vast 1,000 domains. A vast 1,000 domains that didn't split into the divine land and infinite wasteland. It portrayed the beginning of the creation of the vast 1,000 domains. In the primordial chaos, the light of the great Tao that resembled the spiritual sea flashed and interweaved. An unprecedentedly dense aura of life was born in this barren and primitive land. Time passed quickly. It was unknown how long it had been, but it didn't feel long at all. There was only a feeling that when the conditions were right, life flourished in that barren and primitive land. Some were strong, some were weak, some were born with the ability to summon wind and rain, and some were so fragile that their lives were fleeting. But from then on, this world was no longer the same. During this process, two extremely powerful forces were born. They were like two beams of golden light that continuously intertwined and spiraled in the world. Two heavenly dragons, the ancestors of the dragon race, Shilong Xianshang and ancestral dragon Songning. Yuan Dragon King pushed his power to the extreme. Without the support of the mysterious sea and in the face of extreme danger, he even faintly exceeded his own limits. Lin Feng shook his head. In the end, it's not the true power of a vast 1,000 domains. He didn't stop moving. His sword slashed down, an endless sword energy and sword rays pierced through the world around King Yuan Dragon's body, riddling it with holes. When Lin Feng's own fingertip swept up the light of the great Tao in his spiritual sea and turned it into sword light, the world formed by the light and shadow was split apart along with everything within it. The golden river rolling around Yuan Dragon King's body was suddenly destroyed, and the terrifying sword light also landed on Yuan Dragon King's body. The golden light that protected Yuan Dragon King's body revealed all kinds of different concepts. They were extremely mysterious, and they all protected Yuan Dragon King's body. There was the powerful defense of the Black Dragon clan that could resist spells and refine armor. There was the vast and seemingly endless demonic power of the Yellow Dragon clan. There was the mysterious divine ability of the Green Jade Dragon clan that could break other people's magic power. There was the unimaginable ability of the White Jade Dragon clan that could change between real and illusory. There was also the power of the Illumination Dragon clan that could control the flow of time. Each of these concepts was mysterious and magical, but they merged together at the same time and were indistinguishable. However, in the next moment, a scene that shocked everyone happened. Lin Feng's sword fell, and in that sword light, there seemed to be endless mysteries of the great Tao as well. The unstoppable sharpness broke through the curse-refined armor. The same majestic power shook the treasure light protecting Yuan Dragon King's body. The concept of condensing and returning to one's true essence blocked the invasion of the Green Jade Dragon flames. Using the path of changing between real and illusory, it forcefully dragged Yuan Dragon King, who wasn't in this world, back into the real world. Time flowed, And in an instant, the mysterious transformation of eternity resolved the divine art of the Illumination Dragon clan that could control time. One sword could give birth to 1,000,000 skills, and one sword could break 1,000,000 skills. No matter how many great Daos you have, I'll break them one by one. Let's see how many tricks you have up your sleeves. Rip. There was a piercing sound in the void, and the golden dragon blood scattered in the void. It was gorgeous yet mournful, and it was accompanied by Yuan Dragon King's howls of pain. At this moment, a ray of black profound light flashed past and attacked Lin Feng. It was the Yudu profound flower of Mirage Sun Yudu. Although strictly speaking he didn't have a good relationship with the dragon race, at this moment, Mirage Sun Yudu still decisively made a move to help Yuan Dragon King. Lin Feng turned back to look at Mirage Sun Yudu and waved at him from afar. In the path of the black profound light, there seemed to be an invisible barrier. When the black Yudu profound flower collided with it, it was like waves crashing onto a reef. The seawater scattered in all directions, and when the waves receded, the reef was still standing. Looking at Lin Feng, even the enchantress and king of the underworld's expressions changed slightly. They took a deep breath and attacked together to help Yuan Dragon King. Even if they gave up on retreating now, where could they retreat to? With Xianmen Tianzong controlling the spirit sea, the situation in the boundless world was no longer the same as before. The enchantress's figure disappeared into the dark clouds below, and there were large amounts of light flashing in the dark clouds. The 12 resplendent pillars of light gradually changed and disappeared. In the end, only 4 pillars of light that gave off an even stronger feeling of power appeared. The figures of the 4 great demon races Kuan Peng, Black Tortoise, Primordial Sky Dragon, and Heaven-reaching Devil Ape appeared in the pillars of light. The 12 sacred heavens ingenious flower formation transformed into the heaven-shaking earth ingenious flower formation at this moment. With boundless power, under the control of the enchantress, it attacked Lin Feng. Before me all is silent. The king of the underworld let out a low sigh, and 3 life and death netherworld Dao fruits flew out to be sacrificed in the netherworld sacrificial altar. They then transformed into a black screen of light to block Lin Feng's attack. Lin Feng ignored this and looked at Yuan Dragon King with a relaxed expression. He suddenly smiled and said, "Oh, seems like I remembered wrongly. The warning I gave you back then was that as long as I'm in the boundless world, you're not allowed to take a step out of the mysterious sea. Oh, I'm in the spirit sea now and not in the boundless world?" Chapter 1429. Lin Feng's tone was casual, but it made the Yuan Dragon King feel suffocated. He felt his anger rising, and his whole body trembled. Meanwhile, Lin Feng's profound sword fell, breaking through the Yuan Dragon King's desperate technique and layers of protective restrictions, leaving a severe wound on his body. The enchantress activated the sky-shaking spectacular array, while the king of the underworld activated the black barrier. They pressed down on Lin Feng's sword light, preventing it from moving forward. However, Lin Feng's sword light contained many wondrous principles, which disintegrated the power of the sky-shaking spectacular array and the black barrier. The heaven and earth-shaking wondrous Luo formation mobilized the Kuan Peng, the Black Tortoise, the Primordial Sky Dragon, and the sky-reaching Demon Ape, these 4 demon races with extremely powerful fleshly bodies, forming a majestic power that could crush the heavens, suppressing Lin Feng's sword light and causing it to slow down. However, when Lin Feng slashed out with his sword, the sword light also seemed to become extremely heavy, as if the weight of the boundless universe was pressing down. That weight was almost impossible to measure with units, and it was difficult to compare it with specific things. It was as if the boundless universe was collapsing, and it was pouring down toward a certain point. Even the enchantress who activated the sky-shaking spectacular array, which had boundless mighty force supporting the heavens and suppressing the earth, felt like it couldn't bear the weight at this moment. It was clearly just an ethereal sword light, but at this moment, it was so condensed that it was unbearable. At the same time, the sword light and the black barrier activated by the king of the underworld clashed violently. The black barrier was extremely condensed, and it wanted to slow down the sword light's advance. Time and space seemed to be distorted at this moment. The attacks that came from other directions all landed on the barrier in front of the king of the underworld, and were blocked by this black barrier. Lin Feng smiled leisurely. It's a little similar to my heaven-shielding umbrella, but, following his chuckle, the silent black curtain of light suddenly burst into a clamor. The black screen of light condensed silently, and there was no shocking aura of magic power that emanated from it. Everything that came into contact with this screen of light would be assimilated. They would lose their vitality and motivation, and silently, they would fall into an eternal slumber. This black barrier was like a door to the world of the dead. There was only deathly silence there. However, at this moment, noises came from the black barrier, instantly breaking the silence of this eternal slumber world. The clamor grew louder and louder. One could vaguely hear the whistling of the wind, the crackling of thunder, and the gurgling of water. There were also the voices of countless creatures. In the end, it was a boiling cauldron of voices. It was as if they had instantly arrived at the most flourishing human world. The Emperor of the Underworld also understood such a change, but this was not the change of the Emperor of the Underworld activating his magical ability, but the change of Lin Feng's sword light. Amidst the noise, the black barrier suddenly shattered, unable to stop. Lin Feng's sword light. The severely injured Yuan Dragon King let out a long roar. Anger flashed in his eyes, but there was more helplessness. A strange door appeared above his head. The door opened, and starlight poured out. This was the Gate of the Sea of Stars owned by the Dragon Clan. It had always been in the hands of the current leader of the Dragon Clan, the Yuan Dragon King. However, at this moment, faced with Lin Feng's fierce attack, the Yuan Dragon King didn't dare to be careless. He had no choice but to activate the Gate of the Sea of Stars. Light shot out from his eyes and shone on the Gate of the Sea of Stars. The giant gate suddenly shook violently, and the starlight that rushed out from the gate enveloped the gate itself. In the next moment, the Gate of the Sea of Stars shook violently, and a powerful force exploded in an instant. Activated by the Yuan Dragon King, who was in the middle of the tribulations, the force that exploded was much stronger than what the Golden Rock Sage and the Enchantress had done in the past. However, this couldn't change the outcome of the matter. Even the Yuan Dragon King could only take the initiative to close his Gate of the Sea of Stars in order to escape. The Yuan Dragon King continued to roar. Under the huge threat of Lin Feng, his power seemed to have exceeded his own limits, and it seemed to have reached a new level. Although it was only for a moment, it exploded with shocking power. This power combined with the power of the Gate of the Sea of Stars, causing the Yuan Dragon King to turn into an ethereal golden light and finally escape from Lin Feng's sword. However, he was still injured by Lin Feng. As the golden light danced, golden dragon blood splattered everywhere in the void. Seeing the Gate of the Sea of Stars gradually solidify, the hearts of the others became heavy. Their desire for the Gate of the Sea of Stars grew stronger. Only Lin Feng smiled and stretched out a hand. He opened his palm, and the Gate of the Sea of Stars fell into his palm. Everyone fell silent at this moment. They looked at Lin Feng, who was calmly holding the Gate of the Sea of Stars in the void, and didn't reveal any clues as usual. It was hard for them to say anything. On the other hand, there was no longer any struggle or hesitation in the monkey's eyes. He laughed loudly and manifested his three-headed and six-armed body. He picked up his cudgel and swung it at Lin Feng. Lin Feng also smiled. Let's exchange one move but save some energy. Golden Cicada has also entered this spiritual sea. Hearing that, the monkey shouted, "One move." Lin Feng put away the Gate of the Sea of Stars with one hand, clenched his other hand into a fist, and punched at the monkey. When this punch was thrown, the scene in everyone's eyes changed. Lin Feng's figure disappeared, and what replaced it were layers of vast and boundless universes. Countless stars followed their own trajectories, silently circulating, showing a silent, natural, and boundless power. But as Lin Feng punched out, the innumerable stars, the innumerable trajectories, the innumerable principles, all changed at this moment. It was not a minor change, but an extremely obvious change. There were even many trajectories that intersected, causing many stars to collide and turn into dust, erupting with shocking power. However, this did not give off a feeling of losing control or chaos. Instead, it gave off a feeling of freedom and freedom. Everyone's eyes shone brightly. That was because they could tell that this was not a mere phantom image conjured by Lin Feng's dermic powers. Instead, it seemed like the true void of the Sea of Stars had undergone such a drastic change due to Lin Feng's move. The many demons that were cultivating with the stars could sense it especially clearly. Spots of starlight appeared from Monkey's acupoints, each spot being a star. The more he pushed his powers to the limits, the deeper he could sense the changes in the universe. The powerful forces from both sides collided at this moment. There was no sound, but it formed a scene of destruction, causing the spirit sea to tremble continuously, as though it was looking at Lin Feng and Monkey with hostility. Monkey's figure flew backward, and the starlight around him scattered. The elephant with 3 heads and 6 arms lost 2 heads and 4 arms, and the waves of demonic power on its body weakened. However, he was not discouraged. Instead, he laughed loudly and somersaulted, landing back on the side of the huge golden lake. Monkey did not attack anymore, but the others were not idle. When Monkey's cudgel smashed down, Sun Mirage Yudu, the Enchantress, King of the Underworld, and even the injured Yuan Dragon King all attacked Lin Feng at this moment. However, they were not the greatest threat. The greatest threat was the mirror light that seemed to cover heaven and earth, its brilliance and profoundness everywhere. In the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace, Dao Lord Tai and Lin Daohan sighed in unison. They formed the same hand sealed together, and then pointed at the void. The Haotian mirror's mirror light no longer competed with the heaven-shrouding umbrella. Instead, it turned its power and finally aimed at Lin Feng. Ever since Lin Feng came to this world, he finally faced the true power and elegance of the #1 treasure of heaven origin. The treasure that had left behind countless legends in the great heaven origin world spread its mirror light at this moment, and its light covered heaven and earth of the spirit sea. It was everywhere, and the entire spirit sea seemed to be covered by its light. In the distant void, several figures appeared in 2 different places. They were Shi Tianhao, Golden Cicada, and the Heavenly Wolf Great Sage, who had entered with the Enchantress but had temporarily hidden himself from the core circle due to his cultivation. They were all wandering outside, but now, under the illumination of the Haotian mirror, they had nowhere to hide. And the light that covered the spirit sea, because the spirit sea was closely connected to the vast 1,000 worlds, overlapped with each other. In the vast 1,000 worlds, be it the divine land or the vast 1,000 worlds, at this moment, the world lit up with a hazy light. Every corner was covered, and it was extremely mysterious. In the spirit sea, under the illumination of this light, Lin Feng's figure also seemed to become faintly discernible, no longer so elusive. The figures in each space gradually became visible, and it was as if they were about to merge into one. Seeing this, Lin Feng revealed a faint smile. In front of him, another Dao fruit appeared. It was indescribable, except for one thing. When this Dao fruit appeared, the light of the Haotian mirror flickered slightly, and in the void, many vague images of the Haotian mirror appeared. They were everywhere, densely packed, and covered all space and time. As the mirror light flowed, there seemed to be signs of merging, and it was no longer as mysterious as before. However, Lin Feng did not attack the Haotian mirror. Instead, he used this Dao fruit to take on the attacks of Sun Mirage, Yudu and the others. As for the Haotian mirror, he stretched out his index finger and gently touched the heart of his brows. Instantly, boundless light shone from the top of Lin Feng's head. However, there was no sense of mystery within the light, only endless signs of destruction. Everyone's gazes froze, and the king of the underworld even felt as if he had returned to the netherworld sea. Within that brilliance, a shadow slowly rose. The melodious sound of a bell resounded throughout the spiritual sea. An ancient bell appeared in front of everyone. This was Lin Feng's life-bonded magic treasure, the bell of good fortune. In the melodious bell sounds, the bell turned into the gate of creation, and then the gate of creation opened, and the river of time flowed out from within. On the surface of the river stood a boy who looked to be only 7 or 8 years old. He had a smile on his face, and in his hand was an ancient book. The book itself was ordinary, and there was no aura coming from it at all. It only seemed very ancient and desolate. However, from within the book, there was a great power that caused all things to move towards decay and decay. It was not simply the flow of time, but even the Tao of time would decay. All great Taos were moving towards a sick and bad state. This was the third manifestation of the bell of creation, the book of destruction. Chapter 1430. When the Book of Collapse appeared, everyone's heart skipped a beat. The aura that it exuded made everyone's heart palpitate. Even the Haotian mirror in the void suddenly darkened. The light of the great path that pulsed in the spirit sea shook continuously. The existence that was like ribbons of light seemed to have been dyed-modeled. Beneath everyone's feet, the giant golden lake surged with waves and ripples. The light that was connected to the primordial golden lamp was also trembling. The light that was manifested by the great path of heaven and earth was connected to the Book of Collapse that was manifested by the bell of fate through Lin Feng. It vaguely formed a cycle, and together, they performed the endless mysteries of creation, birth and death. Seeing this, everyone's heart sank. It's different from the heaven punishing sword. Just as they thought about this, Fate Creation Boy, who was holding the Book of Collapse, smiled and flipped open the pages. Suddenly, mysterious airflow gushed out from it, and fell toward the Haotian mirror. The airflow split into thousands of pieces, and kept expanding in the void. Wherever the airflow reached, the treasured mirror that seemed to exist in all time and space started to gradually change. The treasured mirrors that were originally invisible and formless began to appear in the void one after another. Every place that could not be described with space was presented by a treasured mirror. It was as if thousands of Haotian mirrors had suddenly appeared in the world. Moreover, the number kept increasing. The area where the treasured mirror existed also kept expanding into the distance. Countless Haotian mirrors appeared in front of everyone. However, all of the treasured mirrors that appeared gradually dimmed at this moment. Initially mysterious and unpredictable, they became extremely bright and dazzling. Following that, even their brightness kept decreasing. In the end, they became dim and even blurry. The surface of the treasured mirror seemed to be covered with a layer of dust, and became shabby. Under the effect of the Book of Collapse, the terrifying power kept expanding, stripping the treasured mirrors out of the void and staining them, causing them to decay. In the Nine Heavens Imperial Court of the Great Void, the experts of the Taishu Temple all felt a chill in their hearts. Lord Tai and Lin Daohan changed their incantations, and then they stretched out their fingers and tapped lightly in the air. Heaven and earth shook violently. In the next moment, innumerable Haotian mirrors suddenly appeared in the spirit sea. In every corner of space and time, everywhere and everywhere. All of the Haotian mirrors shone brightly at the same time, illuminating the entire spiritual sea. What was even more eye-catching was that outside the spiritual sea, the boundless universe seemed to be shaken at this moment, and the entire world seemed to be in turmoil. The world was truly shaken. Not only did the cultivators feel the turbulence of the Tao of heaven and earth and the changes of the spiritual energy, even the ordinary people could feel that the world they lived in seemed to be undergoing drastic changes. Wind and clouds surged between heaven and earth, and countless weather phenomena appeared at the same time. In the spirit sea that was closely connected to the boundless universe, light and shadows flashed in every corner and inch of the void. At this moment, the boundless universe seemed to have completely overlapped with the spirit sea, and in the light of countless Haotian mirrors, countless scenes of the creation of the boundless universe were reflected. All the mirror lights connected, and the portion of the treasured mirror that was stained by the power of the Book of Collapse also shone brightly at this moment, as if it was reborn. The mottled traces of decay gradually faded, and the mirror surface shone brighter and brighter, until it became dazzling. However, under the effect of the aura of the Book of Collapse, the treasured mirror that was stained previously could not return to its original mysterious state, nor could it project the boundless universe like the other treasured mirrors. There was no sound in the spirit sea, but a shocking battle was unfolding, and both sides were in a stalemate. The light and shadows of the billions of Haotian mirrors in the void kept flashing, faintly discernible. Fate Creation Boy held the Book of Collapse in his hand, and calmly flipped through the pages. One after another, seemingly ordinary, but in fact extremely terrifying, chi of collapse and destruction, which caused everyone's expression to change, flew out from the book. Lin Feng smiled, and his expression was relaxed, as if he was not surprised at all. However, everyone present, including Lin Feng's disciples and White Tiger Great Sage, were all shocked. The scene before them seemed simple, but what was the opponent of the Book of Collapse now? It was the #1 magic treasure of the Great Tianyuan world, the Haotian Mirror, since the end of the primitive times and the beginning of the ancient times. During the war between the two realms, Lin Feng had successfully refined the sky-crushing sword for the second time. Before the reappearance of Xianli, it was the most powerful treasure of the Great Tianyuan world. Throughout the ages, the Haotian Mirror had always been a deterrent to the entire Great Tianyuan world. Although the Haotian Mirror had been damaged and weakened over the ages, even then, most of the experts did not dare to act rashly. The king of the underworld, the last human emperor of the ancient era, the ruthless emperor, the supreme lord of the devil path in the middle era, the primitive devil cult leader Jiang Zhaoyang, and countless great demon experts had more or less used their lives to prove this point. Quan Ryudu looked at the Haotian Mirror and thought of the fall of Yuhuang Heavenly Sea in the war between the two realms 4,600 years ago. Yuan Dragon King looked at the Haotian Mirror and thought of the fall of Juehuang Xuanshang in the ancient era. Even the monkey looked at the Haotian Mirror and thought of Jihuang Xinyuan, who had suppressed him in the middle era. He was the strongest among the saint emperors of the demon race, and one of the 3 great demons in the history of the Great Tianyuan world. He could also be said to be the 3 strongest existences in the history of the Great Tianyuan world: Juehuang Xuanshang, Jihuang Xinyuan, and Yuhuang Heavenly Sea. Their deaths were closely related to the Haotian Mirror. The enchantress and king of the underworld looked at the Haotian Mirror with unconcealable calmness. Even the future glazed Buddha Lord couldn't ignore his existence. However, such an existence had been defeated by a Mahayan-grade treasure. That's right, it was a Mahayan-grade treasure. When everyone realized this, their expressions became extremely complicated. Their feelings were difficult to describe with words. This wasn't the Haotian Mirror that hadn't been able to fully recover. This was the Haotian Mirror that had truly returned to its peak. Even the terrifying heaven-punishing sword that could destroy the heavens and destroy the Tao was only on par with the Haotian Mirror. Both the heaven-punishing sword and the Haotian Mirror were far superior to other treasures. Even among the treasures of creation, there wasn't a third treasure that could be compared to them, let alone other treasures. However, at this moment, one of the 2 strongest treasures in the Great Tianyuan world, the Haotian Mirror, was defeated by a Mahayan-grade treasure. Even the future star-glazed Buddha Lord, who was always calm and collected, was looking at the ordinary-looking Book of Destruction with a flickering light in his eyes. In the 9 Heavens Palace of the Great Void, the expressions of Tao Lord Tai and the others were unprecedentedly solemn. The atmosphere was even more oppressive. The Xianlin Taoist said dryly, "This treasure of his rarely appears in the world, but there are traces of it in the past." In the Battle of West Hill City, the spirit-nurturing level gate of creation transformed into a primordial spirit Tao soldier, and used an unimaginable Tao formation to suppress the Mahayan-grade sky peak of the Twin Poles. In the Battle of Xian Extermination, the Battle of Mount Shu, and the War of the Two Realms after that, the River of Time of the Incarnate Stage had only appeared briefly, but every time it appeared, it would manifest extraordinary power and mystery. It was not inferior to the Great Wheel of Heaven, the Divine Prefecture Cauldron, and the Taishu Sage Temple. Now this treasure had finally advanced from the transformation level to the Mahayan grade. And the power of the Mahayan grade bell of creation manifested into the Book of Destruction was indeed shocking. Everything seemed so logical and logical, but in the eyes of the crowd, it still gave birth to a feeling of disbelief. After the heaven-crushing sword, another treasure that could be mentioned in the same breath as the Haotian Mirror had appeared. In the long history of the Great Tianyuan world, as a treasure of creation nurtured by the vast thousand worlds, the Haotian Mirror had always stood out. But now, there were existences that could shake its position, and there were 2 of them. 2 treasures that could compete with the Haotian Mirror had appeared in the same era, and these 2 treasures belonged to the same person. Everyone present was the top experts of the Great Tianyuan world. They had gone through countless trials and tribulations, and their state of mind was extremely stable. But at this moment, they were all dazed for a moment. Apart from that, Was there any possibility that the bell of creation could be improved further? In the next moment, everyone came back to their senses. Apart from the monkey, everyone else attacked Lin Feng and the creation boy. At this moment, they could no longer hold back. They had to unite and go all out. Otherwise, there would be no suspense in the battle of the Spirit Sea. The terrifying attacks that blanketed the sky and the earth were all directed at Lin Feng. The light of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea shook continuously. The ribbons of light in the sky broke, and the water in the golden lake churned continuously. There was a faint dazzling light flashing. At this moment, the Spirit Sea, which had been repaired by everyone previously, showed signs of tearing again. Even with Lin Feng's primordial golden lamp and heaven-shrouding umbrella stabilizing time and space, the terrifying power still caused the Spirit Sea to shake violently, revealing an obvious sense of rejection. It was not that Sun Huan, Yudu, and the rest did not realize this, but at this moment, they had no more scruples. The worst outcome was that the Spirit Sea would crack again, and everyone would be repelled by the Spirit Sea. That was still better than the Spirit Sea ending up in the hands of Xianmen Tianzong. Seeing this, Lin Feng did not look upset. With a smile on his face, his fruit of Tao appeared in front of him again, and he faced his opponents. Without the Haotian mirror targeting him, Lin Feng's figure became elusive again, drifting erratically. He seemed to be in all time and space, truly transcending time and space. There was nothing he could not do, and he was everywhere. At this moment, he no longer targeted a single opponent. Instead, he appeared in front of everyone at the same time. A sword slashed at the Yuanlong king. A finger pointed at the Sun Huan Yudu. A palm pressed at the enchantress. A hand grabbed at the king of the underworld. A fist struck at the future star-glazed Buddha Lord. Chapter 1431. At that moment, the Haotian mirror was everywhere in the Spirit Sea. It was as if it was endless. However, apart from the part of the mirror that had been infected by the Book of Destruction and couldn't recover, the rest of the Haotian mirror was mysterious and profound. It seemed illusory and real, as if it didn't exist in this world. Even though everyone was in the world of the Spirit Sea, and their figures overlapped with the Haotian mirror's light and shadow, they couldn't sense its existence. They could only see traces of it. It was as if two different worlds had completely overlapped, but they didn't interfere with each other. Only near the Book of Destruction, where the two sides were wrestling, the bright mirrors were also in the space-time where everyone was. The Haotian mirror was facing off against the Book of Destruction, so it didn't affect the others. And at this moment, Lin Feng appeared in front of a group of experts at the same time in an instant. It seemed to be an understatement, but it made everyone focus 120% to deal with it. Their terrifying attacks were blocked by Lin Feng's Tao fruit, and Lin Feng's attack was already right in front of them. It wasn't teleportation or time manipulation. At that moment, Lin Feng had truly appeared in front of everyone at the same time. In reality, the real attack wasn't completely synchronized with time. However, it wasn't that Lin Feng couldn't do it. He just did it casually and didn't deliberately pursue it. Although the attack wasn't truly synchronized, regardless of whether it was the Mirage Sun Yudu, the Yuan Dragon King, the Enchantress, the King of the Underworld, or even the future star-glazed Buddha Master, they could all clearly confirm that the person in front of them was Lin Feng himself. Everyone was either close or far away from each other, but at that moment, they were facing Lin Feng at close range. They were facing a person who seemed to be everywhere and in all space-time. In front of the Yuan Dragon King, Lin Feng used his finger as a sword again and stabbed out. The radiance of the great Tao in the Spirit Sea swept out and gathered at the tip of the sword. He slashed at the Yuan Dragon King. Roar! Although he was already injured, the Yuan Dragon King wasn't willing to sit and wait for death. With a deafening dragon roar, he once again activated his power to resist the terrifying sword intent unleashed by Lin Feng. The golden light in the sky was vast and mighty, and the Yuan Dragon King's huge body kept tumbling. However, the sword light followed him like a shadow, closing in on him with every step. In front of the King of the Underworld, there was also a Lin Feng, his palm outstretched, fingers outstretched, as he reached out toward the King of the Underworld. The King of the Underworld seemed to be in a daze, sizing up Lin Feng with a strange look in his eyes. His gaze fell on the Haotian mirror, and his eyes revealed many emotions that could not be concealed. There were sighs, regret, desire. There were many other emotions. Since the ancient era, he had hoped to obtain this heavenly origin treasure, hoping that he could truly ascend to the top of the divine prefecture. After countless painstaking efforts and even paying a high price, he finally obtained the best opportunity during the war between the two realms, and he was only one step away from success. However, this step was an insurmountable chasm, and the person who made this happen was none other than Lin Feng. It was also at that time that he saw the sky-crushing sword, whose pure offensive power was even stronger than the Haotian mirror. Today, he actually saw a second treasure that could be mentioned in the same breath as the Haotian mirror. However, just like the sky-crushing sword, this treasure also belonged to the Lin Feng in front of him. This made the king of the underworld's heart tremble, and he had mixed feelings. He took a deep look at Lin Feng, then turned around and left. The king of the underworld's flying speed was very fast, but Lin Feng's palm was even faster, still reaching for his back. 3 life-death underworld Dao fruits, half black and half white, flew out, and a huge pitch-black 3-tiered altar appeared. The Dao fruits flew into it, and as the king of the underworld said sacrifice, the altar suddenly shook. The pitch-black altar, at this moment, as the king of the underworld left with his back to Lin Feng, continued to collapse, and finally turned into a pitch-black path. The king of the underworld seemed unwise to flee with his back to Lin Feng, but there was no trace of panic on his face. In a low voice he said, "Behind me, there is no life." Before he finished speaking, the pitch-black path gradually turned gray, but it looked even darker. Wherever the king of the underworld passed, everything lost its life, and turned into a deathly stillness. Spiritual chi was dead, space was dead, time was dead, the enemy's magic power was dead, the enemy's flesh and blood body was dead, the enemy's spirit soul was dead, and the enemy's magic power was dead. Everything, whether it was tangible or intangible, sentient or not, whether it was truly alive or not, at this moment, was forcefully defined as life and death, and fell into a state of death. Only the king of the underworld continued forward alone. This was not just his escape technique, nor was it his defense. At the same time, it was also his offensive technique. All sorts of wondrous uses were fused into a furnace, turning everything in his path into death. However, a palm still clawed towards the middle of his back. Wherever this palm passed, spiritual energy came to life, and began to flow and pulse again. Space came to life, and there were 4 directions: up and down, distance and time came to life, and flowed endlessly once more. Wherever the palm passed, the void actually gave birth to thousands of living beings. Birds sang and flowers bloomed, as if it was an independent world. The gray path was constantly whittled away, and no matter how fast the king of the underworld's escape technique was, the palm was always faster than him. It didn't even get close to him as it reached for him. The king of the underworld's expression finally changed, but the palm had already reached the center of his back. The movement was light and simple, but it instantly caused the king of the underworld to stop in his tracks. The king of the underworld growled, and the book of life and death appeared in his hand. As he flipped it, rays of inexplicable light appeared, turning into a gray world of the dead that enveloped the king of the underworld, trying to isolate him from the palm that was grabbing him. However, specks of light suddenly lit up on the palm, like specks of dust, seemingly unremarkable. But in the next instant, these specks of dust transformed into a boundless universe. 49 worlds appeared, and majestic power blasted together, bombarding the king of the underworld and the book of life and death. After Lin Feng reached the Dao integration stage, the power of his divine abilities in the past was no longer the same. Violent power exploded forth, directly shattering the world created by the book of life and death. The king of the underworld's body also trembled violently, and streaks of black light gushed forth from his primordial spirit like blood splattering in all directions. At the same time, the enchantress looked at Lin Feng, who had appeared before him. He looked at the palm that was pressing down like a 5-fingered mountain, and a bitter smile seemed to appear on his blurry face. The heaven-shaking earth miraculous array formation manifested into 4 huge pillars of light that shot up into the sky like pillars of heaven. and Lin Feng's palm that was pressing down seemed to be able to overturn heaven and earth, and collapse the heavens. Even the 4 pillars of heaven began to shake violently the moment they came into contact with it. Lin Feng stared at the enchantress, his face expressionless. "De Luo Yudu, Xianyao, is my disciple. Do you find pleasure in making up stories and stirring up trouble?" His palm continued to press down, and a taiji diagram appeared in the center of his palm. As the taiji rotated, the light of the heaven-shaking earth miraculous array formation began to disintegrate. The 4 pillars of heaven could only helplessly collapse in the face of this apocalyptic calamity. The great building was about to collapse, and it was difficult to turn the tide. Within the heaven-shaking earth miraculous array formation, the enchantress completely revealed her original true form at this moment. This was because she could clearly feel that she was facing a situation that was even more dangerous than the one she had faced in the war between the 2 worlds. Within the formation, amidst the vast expanse of dark clouds, an indistinct shadow floated in the air. With this shadow as the center, rays of brilliance flowed continuously. The flowing brilliance suddenly stopped and gathered into a shadow of light. Strange syllables came from the shadow of light, and strange waves of magic power also came from it. In the next moment, the indistinct shadow exploded together with the vast expanse of dark clouds. At the most critical moment, the enchantress didn't dare to hold anything back. She directly used her last resort and self-destructed her original true form to fight for an opportunity for herself. However, the taiji diagram in the center of Lin Feng's palm suddenly reversed after a moment of stillness. With this reversal, everything that was pressed down by Lin Feng's palm began to collapse towards a single point. That powerful force that was even more terrifying than a black hole produced the effect of compression. The power that erupted from the true form of the enchantress was actually forcefully suppressed, unable to spread out. That terrifying change that could even incite the boundless world was forcefully suppressed, unable to do anything. Borrowing this explosion, the 12 sacred heavens miraculous array formation that had roused itself also withered in an instant. It was as if the rousing from before was just a facade. The shadow of light in the dark clouds gave off a dull grunt. Instead, it was contained within the dark clouds that couldn't explode outwards and had to bear the power of the counterattack. If it wasn't for the protection of the formation, the enchantress wouldn't just have self-destructed her original true form. Her own demon soul might have even been destroyed by this explosion. The 12 sacred heavens miraculous array formation was also in chaos because of this. It was in great turmoil as it endured the terrifying power that rose from within itself. Yude Huanri looked at Lin Feng in front of him with an extremely grim expression. He didn't know why Lin Feng, who had to rely on the heaven-punishing sword to defeat him in the war between the 2 worlds back then, possessed such terrifying power on his own. Even in that exchange just now, he didn't feel that Lin Feng had such remarkable abilities. However, none of this was what he was concerned about now. He only cared about how to deal with the current Lin Feng. Lin Feng pointed at him, and a black and a white beam of light intertwined. As they gathered, a beam of eternal calamity light shot towards him. That terrifying eternal calamity light transformed into a myriad of great Daos, and evolved into the concept of the eternal truth. It had already become complete, and wherever the light passed by, it was extremely profound. It was just like Lin Feng's Dao fruit. It finally had a concrete image that could be described and described. However, the power contained within was similarly tyrannical and unfathomable. It broke through all existences that dared to block its path. Yude Huanri didn't take it head-on this time. With a grim expression, he pulled back the broken horn that came from Yuhuang's celestial sea into the golden lake water. A purple screen of light and black light appeared together to block in front of Yude Huanri. Looking at the purple screen of light, Lin Feng smiled slightly. Creation divine light of black and white shone from his body, shaking the heavens even more. The eternal calamity light became even more terrifying, but it still broke through the layers of obstruction. Chapter 1432. Wherever the majestic eternal calamity light passed by, large numbers of purple and black divine markings would shatter. The space-time of the Spirit Sea was also being destroyed in this process. The scene was extremely tragic, and people couldn't help but suspect that if the battle hadn't happened in the Spirit Sea, the destruction would have been even more unimaginable. With a grunt, Mirage Sun and Yudu were pushed back, leaving behind black flowing light in the void like blood splattering in all directions. On the other side of the battlefield, future star-glazed Buddha Lord was also facing Lin Feng's attack. Lin Feng punched towards him. Under the vast power, the galaxy seemed to roll backwards. Countless stars were shifted at this moment, deviating from their original orbits. In the light and shadow, countless stars collided and shattered. The scene was even more shocking than when Lin Feng and Monkey had fought. Lin Feng's primordial spirit seemed to have evolved into a body of flesh and blood. However, the majestic power of qi and blood contained in it was almost suffocating. Future star-glazed Buddha Lord looked at him and didn't say anything. He formed a mudra with both hands, and his 2 middle fingers were bent into the shape of a sword. His 2 index fingers were extended to the back of his 2 middle fingers. Once the mudra was formed, terrifying power spread out even before he punched. The past couldn't be chased, and the future was unpredictable. Only the present could be grasped firmly and dominate everything. The last move of Vairocana Divine Palm, Vajra Realm Freedom Mudra. The strongest fist that had been passed down in the Divine Land for countless years. The highest peak of the martial Tao in the history of the human cultivation world. With a punch, the light that illuminated the entire Spirit Sea world was illuminated. Unlike Mirage Sun and Yudu, who could only defend with the broken horn of Yuhuang Celestial Sea and couldn't attack, future star-glazed Buddha Lord's punch completely erupted with power. Even the Haotian Mirror and Book of Destruction were affected, and some of their attention was diverted. In a trance, the entire Spirit Sea world turned into a huge Buddha's hand mudra. In the center of the mudra, a swastika character covered the sky and covered everything. Lin Feng laughed and didn't stop punching. However, in the fistful of the martial Tao that exploded the endless starry sky, there was a new change. Countless stars collided, turning into a large amount of dust that pervaded the universe. The light was completely shattered, leaving only boundless darkness. The dark universe was not peaceful. Time and space were divided into countless regions, each operating according to different rules. They overlapped and gathered together, forming a strange feeling of distortion. This strange distortion, the terrifying power of the universe collapsing, at this moment, was completely manifested in Lin Feng's martial path fist intent. When he punched out, heaven and earth distorted, but it didn't shatter. Amidst the extreme destructive power, it also contained a powerful control power, profound to the finest detail. At this moment, the swastika symbol that enveloped the heavens and earth displayed its unmoving nature. Even though the universe's spacetime was distorting, it didn't change. Instead, it became more condensed, and its power became more concentrated. But in the next moment, in Lin Feng's fist intent, the universe of time and space, which seemed to be distorted as a whole, suddenly evolved into a unified law, and the universe settled down again. However, the principles and laws within were different from the normal spacetime of the universe. It was like a brand new world. And in this world all the laws, dharma, and logos were controlled by Lin Feng. Even the Vairocana Buddha's palm could no longer exist freely here. The swastika symbol, which was still unmoving due to the distortion of spacetime, became unstable in this stable spacetime. The future star-glazed Buddha Lord wanted to use his supreme power to forcefully break through, suppressing this unique universe spacetime along with Lin Feng. But at this moment, the power of Lin Feng's fist exploded completely, using force to break force, clashing with the former king of martial arts, Vajra Realm Freedom Seal. The Spirit Sea shook once again, and the Buddha light dissipated. Lin Feng's body stood still, while the future star-glazed Buddha Lord's figure fell backward, almost falling from the sky-reaching pagoda. Many of the stars in his 48,000 palms dimmed. In an instant, Lin Feng swept through the surroundings. Although he was fighting against many, he was still unstoppable. As space-time changed, while the other experts were competing, Lin Feng's figure also appeared in front of the Nine Heavens Imperial Court. He raised one hand, his palm like a knife, and struck down at the Nine Heavens Imperial Court. As the palm struck down, the world in front of him seemed to turn into a light gauze, cut open from the middle. The vast and lofty 9-layered illusory ball of light, at this moment, flashed. The magic faded, and the light became dazzling, but a lot more ordinary. The people of Taishu Temple could only watch as the ball of light in front of them was cut open. Lord Tai closed his eyes, looking at Lin Feng, took a deep breath, and put his palms together. His magical power surged, turning into a small light shadow of the 9 Heavens Imperial Court, and continued to shroud and protect the people present. And above the 9 Heavens Imperial Court formed by Lord Tai's magical power, the great void mysterious light fell like a curtain of water. Mysterious and mysterious, blocking Lin Feng's attack. But at the edge of Lin Feng's palms, at this moment, there was also the mysterious light of eternal calamity, constantly flowing and rotating at the edge of his palms. That bizarre power continued to wear down the Taishu mystic light in the sky, knocking it down from its mysterious state, and making it ordinary. Then it dimmed and disappeared in the end. Dots of light lit up on Lord Tai's body, and each small dot of light was like a god opening his eyes. Endless incantations evolved from the small dots of light, and a large number of incantations condensed into seals. With these seals as the core, pieces of crystal-like existence appeared in the void. Countless fragments, together, turned into a light curtain, shrouding the 9 Heavens Imperial Court, Lord Tai and the others, and strengthening the 9 Heavens Imperial Court. When the light curtain appeared, the people of Taishu Temple seemed to have stepped into a realm without calamities and tribulations, invulnerable to all magic, and untainted by all evil. Naturally, it was Lord Tai's creation divine light, calamity divine light. Shoichi Dashin, Lord Xian-Yi Lin Daohan, and the others also activated their magical power, helping Lord Tai to strengthen the new 9 Heavens Imperial Court to resist Lin Feng's attack. Lin Feng's expression did not change, and his palms still fell. Although the speed had become slightly slower, it still broke through the 9 Heavens Imperial Court with an unstoppable momentum. The light curtain formed by Lord Tai's calamity divine light rippled like water ripples, and under Lin Feng's attack, it also turned from magical to ordinary, losing its invulnerable power. It was shaken from the foundation, and without the skin, where would the hair attach itself to? It could only helplessly scatter. The Haotian mirror was still in a stalemate with the Book of Destruction, and the people of Taishu Temple could only helplessly retreat in the face of Lin Feng's power. Without their support, the 9 Heavens Imperial Court that manifested in the Spirit Sea completely collapsed. On the other battlefields, everyone was at a disadvantage. Amidst mournful cries, the Yuan Dragon King, who was already injured, suddenly had an even more severe wound appear on his body. He almost fell from the void, and the magic power and aura around his body dimmed. The black light on the King of the Underworld's body faded and turned white. The Book of Life and Death kept flipping, and the magical power of the man and the treasure merged, as if they had turned into a black and white roulette. The roulette was shattered by Lin Feng's palm. With a muffled groan, the figure of the King of the Underworld reappeared. At this stage, he had temporarily escaped from Lin Feng's first round of attacks. However, his magical power and aura had become extremely weak, and his face was even paler. The contrast with his pitch-black eyes was even more obvious. To him, the more pressing problem was that Lin Feng was still in front of him like a shadow. Lin Feng's expression was calm, and he reached out to grab him again. The exact same action, the exact same calmness, and the exact same domineering and unstoppable force. The enchantress was firmly suppressed by Lin Feng's palm, and could only rely on the 12 sacred heavens' ingenious flower formation to resist. The heaven-reaching demonic ape, the primordial celestial dragon, and the Kuren Peng had already disappeared. In their place were the phoenix, Kirin, and Zhuzheng, who were setting up the formation together with the black tortoise. The heaven-shaking ingenious flower formation had already turned into the heaven-protecting nirvana ingenious flower formation. However, under the pressure of Lin Feng's mountain-like power, everything was in danger. Future glazed Buddha was pushed back by Lin Feng. Looking at Lin Feng, who attacked again, although his expression was not flustered, he was also filled with a sigh. His 480 million palms suddenly joined together, and then he turned into a beam of light, merging with the sky-reaching pagoda. Seeing this, Lin Feng raised his eyebrows slightly. Then he saw the sky-reaching pagoda and the future glazed Buddha Lord's figures disappear together, leaving only endless light in the world. The light was not dazzling, but it was as clear as glass. It enveloped the entire spirit sea world, making the world in front of everyone seem to have turned the color of glass. It was quiet and natural, and the endless mysteries were revealed. It was peaceful, as if it was showing the future of the world, the home of all living beings. The Eastern Glazed Light World. The Eastern Glazed Light World that the future glazed Buddha Lord and the sky-reaching pagoda had manifested together. When this world appeared, the glazed light world illuminated the world, giving rise to a miraculous change. Figures flickered before everyone's eyes, as if there were countless figures of Lin Feng, appearing in every corner of time and space. Then, these figures gradually gathered at one point. Sensing the changes, Lin Feng had a faint smile on his face. The future glazed Buddha Lord's move could not cause any real harm to him. The only effect was to wear down his current freedom, which seemed to exist in all time and space. This way, the other people's attacks will be able to focus on him. Otherwise, the scene in front of him may seem absurd, but it really is Lin Feng ganging up on the others. In order to do this, one had to have the same level of power as Lin Feng. Only the Haotian mirror was present, but it was blocked by the Book of Destruction. The future glazed Buddha Lord was helpless. He could only use his great magic power to manifest the glazed world of the East and contain Lin Feng within. He is proficient in the path of karma and fate. He can discern the true meaning of space-time. His own cultivation strength is also only a step away from the middle tribulation or completion stage. Only then can he manifest this magic power. But while he was wearing down Lin Feng was also wearing down his magic power. He, who was at a disadvantage, was destined to only last for a short time before Lin Feng broke through it again. At that time, Lin Feng would not be injured, but he would be heavily injured. But in this situation, this is undoubtedly the best choice. Seeing this, the other spirits were roused, once again gathering their remaining courage and attacking Lin Feng. Lin Feng looked at the scene in front of him with interest. He chuckled and increased the strength of his palm. The 12 sacred heavens' wonderful splendor formation that was still suppressed by his palm completely collapsed. Chapter 1433. The heaven-protecting Nirvana apparition formation shattered, and streams of light scattered in the void. The shadows of the 4 great demon races Phoenix, Black Tortoise, Qilin, and Juezheng let out sky-shaking roars before vanishing. Next, the shadows of the other 8 great demon races, including the primordial heavenly dragon, Golden Rock, Kunpeng, heaven-reaching devil ape, and Chaos also scattered. The entire formation crumbled, and white light flickered within, giving birth to a powerful force of creation and recovery. This was the last use of the heaven-protecting Nirvana apparition formation, which sent the enchantress's heavily injured demon soul far away. She had self-detonated her true form and suffered Lin Feng's attack, so her injuries were extremely severe. She didn't dare to stay any longer, and quickly escaped. However, Lin Feng flipped his palm, and a Taiji diagram spun in his palm, suppressing her below and rendering her immobile. Lin Feng said indifferently, "I'll deal with you after I ask Dao Friend Ning. For now, just stay here and wait." As he said that, Lin Feng's body moved, and 7 colored halos flowed around him. He took a step forward instead of retreating, walking towards Mirage Sun, Yudu, and the rest. He tapped gently with his finger, and black and white lights intertwined, deducing the essence of the changes of creation. The profound and overbearing eternal calamity light swept through the void and blocked all the attacks from Mirage Sun, Yudu, King Yuan Dragon, and the King of the Underworld. Wherever the eternal calamity light passed, everything seemed to step into the flow of the great Tao of life and death. Only the great Tao of life and death was eternal, the only one, and the truth. At that moment, in the world of Eastern glazed light, Lin Feng's thousands of figures merged into one. It was as if only Lin Feng existed in time and space. However, his methods were still overbearing. One hand executed the eternal calamity light, and the other smacked towards Mirage Sun and Yuda's head. Taiji light markings flashed in his palm, and as they circulated, they slowly came to a stop. Then they suddenly reversed and burst forth with an extremely powerful force. Mirage Sun and Yudu frowned, and the Yudu Xianhua rushed into the sky, blocking Lin Feng's palm like a heavenly pillar. Layers of starlight appeared inside, causing the terrifying Yudu profound flower to be like a black galaxy. At this moment, it was extremely condensed to defend against Lin Feng's attack. Lin Feng's palm was held up by the black profound light, and it paused in the air for a moment before continuing to fall. Although the momentum was much slower, the black pillar of light that was like a pillar supporting the sky began to shatter bit by bit from top to bottom. Meanwhile, Lin Feng's palm continued to press down, and in Sun Mirage Yuda's vision, it seemed to become larger and larger. On Lin Feng's other hand, his index and 2 fingers were placed side by side. Using his fingers as a sword, he sent 2 swords in the air towards the Yuan Dragon King and the King of the Underworld respectively, allowing them to catch the fish and win. Even though he had temporarily lost the freedom of space and time because of the Virokana world of the East, Lin Feng was still unstoppable at this moment, and everyone present found it hard to deal with him. What made everyone's hearts sink even more was that Lin Feng's clone was still sitting in the primordial golden lamp. Although because of the shockwaves from the battle, Lin Feng's clone and the primordial golden lamp's refinement of the spirit sea had clearly slowed down, they didn't stop. They continued to advance step by step. The surface area of the huge golden lake was gradually shrinking without a sound. In the Virokana world of the East, the chanting of Buddhas echoed continuously. However, as time passed, the clear and pure world gradually dimmed. Boundless light still shone on the spirit sea, but the pure and clear essence within was gradually fading away. As a result, the entire Virokana world of the East showed signs of turbidity. It wasn't that it looked turbid, but in everyone's perception, it was gradually turning from clear to turbid. Lin Feng looked at the Virokana world of the East and didn't say a word. Sun Mirage Yudu, Yuan Dragon King, and the rest didn't understand, but Lin Feng clearly knew what the future star constellation glazed Buddha Master was thinking. To her, Lin Feng was the biggest obstacle in her path. In some sense, he might even be the only obstacle. Both sides would definitely have to fight. Future star constellation glazed Buddha Master didn't care much about how Xianmen Tianzong grew, and how he ascended to the pinnacle of the divine land, and even the great heaven primordial world. There was no hatred between them. More accurately speaking, there was even good karma and good karma. The resurgence of Buddhism might be opposed. The Great Zhou Empire might be opposed. The Shushan sword sect might be opposed. And all the powers that had participated in the battle of vanquishing Buddhism might be opposed. Even the demon race on Heaven Wasteland continent might not be willing to see another powerful human power rise again. However, Xianmen Tianzong didn't care. If Buddhism didn't take the initiative to be hostile, Xianmen Tianzong wouldn't interfere with Buddhism's resurgence on the divine land. This was the case for Lin Feng, and the future star constellation glazed Buddha Master could also see this point clearly. Therefore, even if he had to fight with Lin Feng, the future star constellation glazed Buddha Master had never intended to make things difficult for Xianmen Tianzong. Golden Cicada and Shintazhe had entered the underworld sea under his orders. They were just a form of restraint. He didn't mind enlightening Shintazhe's conversion to Buddhism, but he didn't care about Shintazhe's control over the underworld sea, because for him, this karma that should be in the future, that must be ended, will always fall on Lin Feng himself. Xianmen Tianzong, Xiaoyan Zhu Yi Wang Lin Shi Tianhao, and the others had all suffered. Even the heaven punishment sword had been destroyed. But as long as Lin Feng himself was still alive, all of this was still meaningless to the future star constellation glazed Buddha Master. And if Lin Feng himself was destroyed, then even if Xianmen Tianzong didn't suffer any other injuries, the future star constellation glazed Buddha Master's goal would be achieved. Xianmen Tianzong being injured, especially with the heaven punishment sword destroyed, would naturally greatly reduce Lin Feng's abilities. This would make it easier to deal with Lin Feng himself later. However, the future star constellation glazed Buddha Master wouldn't do this himself, nor would he carry out such a plan. At most, he would just watch from the side. If he wanted to settle the future karma, it would only fall on Lin Feng himself. But it was also because of this that when he fought with Lin Feng, he had to give it his all and leave no leeway behind compared to Sun Mirage, Yudu, King Yuan Dragon, and even the people of Taishu Temple. Lin Feng was well aware of this, so he didn't say anything more. A Dao fruit appeared above his head. That indescribable and elusive point seemed to be the starting and ending point of all things. It was as if it was the combination of the great Dao's mysteries. The Dao fruit remained there and didn't move. However, the world of glazed light in the east started to become more and more unstable. On the other side, the people of Taishu Temple looked at this scene with extremely solemn expressions. Taiwan Venerable's hands changed repeatedly, and then he pointed at the sky. A small-scale illusory nine heavens imperial court appeared, and a stream of air rushed up, piercing through the nine heavens and transcending above. It transformed into a light that was even more mysterious and unfathomable than the great void mysterious light that filled the sky. When this light appeared, Taiwan Venerable's body that didn't seem to have any changes seemed to suddenly become tall and big. He was no longer the same as before. The light spread out and merged with the millions of Haotian mirrors that covered every corner of space-time. As the light of the Haotian mirror flashed, it gradually dimmed. Countless treasured mirrors actually gradually disappeared in the void. However, people could still clearly feel that they were still there, in every corner of this world, in every layer of space-time. In the world of the Spirit Sea, the light of the Great Tao flowed continuously, becoming more mysterious and vast. The aura of the power of the Haotian mirror also became more profound. The many treasured mirrors that were touched by the Book of Collapse also started to glow more and more unfathomable. They gradually pressed towards the Book of Collapse in the center. Fate Creation Boy held the Book of Collapse and stood on the spot. When he saw this, he raised his eyebrows slightly. Lin Feng naturally felt it at the first moment, and also raised his eyebrows. Suddenly, 7 colored halos appeared on his body and flowed continuously. As the light flowed, Lin Feng's figure flashed. He had already escaped from the encirclement of Sun Mirage, Yudu, Yuan Dragon King, and King of the Underworld. The three of them could only watch helplessly. With one step, time and space no longer existed. Lin Feng instantly appeared in front of Dao Master Tai and the others. A beam of eternal calamity light shot out and instantly cut off the mysterious light emitted by Dao Master Tai's fingertip. It also destroyed the calamity divine light around Dao Master Tai's body. Lin Daohan's eyes were sharp and his hands were quick. He used his right hand to pinch a spell, and the Taishu engraving on the back of his left hand flashed. Then he slapped his palm towards the Haotian mirror. Between heaven and earth, the light of the Haotian mirror was extremely mysterious. It shone in all directions, but it was also focused on one point. It enveloped Dao Master Tai's body and blocked Lin Feng's eternal calamity light. However, in this way, the situation of the battle between Dao Master Tai and the Book of Collapse was suddenly reversed. The Book of Collapse, which was originally at a disadvantage, immediately turned the situation around. The terrifying aura of collapse and destruction continued to spread, dragging out the Haotian mirror one after another from time and space. They were contaminated, losing their magic and becoming dark and gloomy. Some of the mirrors even started to decay and break. Dao Master Tai retreated by a hair's breadth. He and Lin Daohan hurriedly cast spells together to help the Haotian mirror regain its footing. On the other side, Sun Mirage, Yudu, King Yuan Dragon, and King of the Underworld attacked again. Looking at Lin Feng, who was moving unhindered, everyone in Taishu Temple felt their hearts sink. Dao Master Xian, he let out a long breath. This kind of divine art and magic power is already at the middle calamity stage, the level of the immortal realm. Even in our temple, only the founding Patriarch Scarlet Sun, and you senior brother Tai, have reached such a realm. Although the Haotian mirror has recovered fully, and the heaven-punishing sword hasn't been able to enter the Spirit Sea, the Master of the Profound Gate has another treasure that is comparable to the Haotian mirror. Shoichi Dashin's gaze fell on the heaven-covering umbrella. Although it's hard to describe that treasure as a treasure, its protective power can only be broken by the Haotian mirror. Even if we want to stop him from refining the Spirit Sea, we can't do it. Everyone fell silent. Xianlin Taoist looked at Lin Daohan. The situation in the Spirit Sea has deteriorated to such an extent. If there isn't a huge change, it will be hard to save it. Now we have to look at the colossal world. Lin Daohan said softly. Everything is just speculation. If things don't go as expected. Dao Master Tai closed his eyes and looked at Lin Feng. Slowly he said, Man proposes. Chapter 1434. On the Divine Land, after the Battle of Mount Shu, the Kuan Dragon King died in battle, and the great sage, Zhu Yan and Shen Dragon King were also defeated. The ancient Emperor Gu Jun, together with Sword Venerable Tiangang, Xian Longsheng, Shi Xingyun and the others, launched a counterattack against the human cultivators. Apart from the 4 great demons of the Age of Cultivation, other demon overlords followed their respective leaders, and set foot on the Divine Land. But at this moment, they had no choice but to constantly retreat, as if history was repeating itself in the later stages of the war between the two worlds. Gu Jun and the others chased after the great sage and the others, while the other human cultivators kept chasing away the demon overlords who came with the great sage and the others. The vast land of the Divine Prefecture and planet Tianhuang surged again. The woman sitting in the void on the coast of the East Sea was frightening, but at the moment, she also gave everyone the greatest confidence. The cultivators of Xianmen Tianzong also attacked and chased along the way. The Protector, Foreign Delegate Zhuge Zhan, Dao Master Liubo and the others, as well as the elites of the second-generation disciples who had reached the Essence Soul State, all joined in. In the Yan Emperor City of the Infinite Wilderness, Great Sage Lu Yuan and the others could not help but attack from another direction. Great Sage Yu Cheng of the Primordial Demon Ape Clan and the heaven-reaching Demon Ape Clan of Lingyuan Mountain returned to the Divine Abyss Mountain after the Great Sage, and Zhu Yan went to the Divine Land. Great Sage Ling of the Extreme Spiritual Divine Monkey Clan, Great Sage Jiu Yu of the Ghost Monkey Clan, and Great Sage Bai Yan of the Divine Abyss Mountain followed the Great Sage and the others to the Divine Land. Now they left in high spirits and returned in low spirits, fleeing back to the infinite wilderness in a sorry state. Great Sage Ling Ji was blocked by Great Sage Lu Yuan and Long Shenke, and almost failed to escape. He only managed to fight his way out after losing a layer of skin. On the other hand, Bai and Great Sage's luck was not so good. A group of people surrounded a huge lake in infinite mainland and sealed off the void. There was no way out. Xianmen Tianzong was the second-generation chief of Fun Tianya, Dao Master Tang Jun. The second-generation chief of Nirvana Wonderland, Dao Master Tianjin, Zhou Yunsong. The second-generation chief of Qingwu Pavilion, Sword Master Dubhe Han Yang. The second-generation elder of Qiantian Palace, Dao Master Tian Bai, Ingluoza. Most of the top figures among the second-generation direct disciples of Xianmen Tianzong were present. Although they were all nascent divinity incarnation realm cultivators, they had surrounded Bai and Great Sage, preventing him from escaping even though he was at the astral soul fusion realm. Bai and Great Sage's gaze was ferocious as he looked around. Apart from Tang Jun and the others, the Mahayana Dharma treasure, the ancient sword Tai Ching, was also present. It hung high in the sky with the tip of the sword pointed down at his head, supporting Tang Jun and the others. This made Bai and Great Sage feel a little short of breath. It was very difficult for him to break out of the encirclement now. However, he was also ferocious and domineering. Seeing that his chances of breaking out were slim, his eyes flashed with ferocity as he wanted to fight with his life on the line. Even so, the opponents before him were not easy to deal with. Tang Jun Han Yang and Zhou Yunsong. Ever since the war between the two realms, they had been publicly acknowledged as the 3 strongest people in terms of actual combat skills among the second-generation successor disciples of the Celestial Sect of Wonders. Zhou Yunsong was the first to make a name for himself. He possessed the Blazing Sun physique, and when he used the Blazing Sun energy breaker, his attacks were sharp and ruthless. Even with Bai and Great Sage's demonic cultivation base, he had to be careful not to be touched by Zhou Yunsong's Blazing Sun energy breaker, making it difficult for him to fight. Tang Jun, on the other hand, possessed the Azure Flame Emperor's physique and the divine light of creation. His style was tough, and he was adept at both offense and defense, giving Bayan Great Sage a headache. On the other side, the seemingly lazy and indifferent Han Yang had the strongest offensive power among the three with his sword in hand. In order to maintain his fighting strength in a protracted battle, Bayan Great Sage would rather take a hit from either Zhou Yunsong or Tang Jun than be injured by Han Yang's sword. The terrifying submerging Yuan sword of extermination contained the concept of the heaven-punishing sword Qi, and it also drew on the strengths of many schools of thought. There was a wound on his left arm, and faint specks of light were constantly seeping out of the wound, making it look as if the wound was bleeding. Han Yang had already reached the nascent divinity realm, and his body was a manifestation of his nascent divinity. However, the wound could not heal, and it remained there. But it was precisely because of this that Bayan Great Sage was even more vigilant. The wound was not left by him to Han Yang, but by Han Yang himself. After being injured, Bayan Great Sage could clearly feel that Han Yang's subsequent attacks were significantly stronger, and the more serious the injury, the stronger Han Yang's next attacks would be. Because of the injury, the unique blood qi of reverse meridians was formed, and it was channeled into his own sword energy. This was a secret technique created by Han Yang. Reversed meridian's blood qi could not only strengthen the power of Han Yang's swordsmanship, but it could also maintain his life while it was in circulation. In theory, when he was on the brink of death, his power would reach its peak. However, at that time, he would only have the strength for one more attack. After that attack, if he did not receive proper treatment, his injuries would be difficult to heal, and he would lose his life. But now that he had a group of fellow disciples around him, Han Yang clearly did not need to worry about this. He did not want to miss the upcoming operation, so there was no need to risk his life. But if there was a need, he could use his sword to shock the heavens. And with the support of the reverse lifeblood qi, his submerging sword became even fiercer, and its pure offensive power even surpassed that of Tang Jun and Zhou Yunsong. At the same time, Ing Luoza, who was far away, was giving Bayan Great Sage a headache. The dark-skinned young man's eyes flashed like a wolf's, and he did not approach. Instead, he stared at Bayan Great Sage from afar, his figure flickering in and out of existence as he moved around. There was a hint of a cold smile on his lips, and he held a flying knife in his hand, aiming at Bayan Great Sage. He looked like he was treating Bayan Great Sage as prey, patient and playful. Seeing this, Bayan Great Sage became irritated and enraged. If it was just Ing Luoza, he would not care, and he would immediately give the kid a good beating. But with Tang Jun, Han Yang, and Zhou Yunsong blocking him, it would be difficult for him to deal with Ing Luoza. And he could not ignore Ing Luoza's existence. If Ing Luoza attacked him, it would be even more difficult for him to deal with Tang Jun and the other two. And being on guard against Ing Luoza would distract him, making it even more dangerous for him to deal with Tang Jun and the others. All of this made Bayan Great Sage even more irritated, and he wanted nothing more than to kill all these juniors in front of him. Besides, although Tang Jun was resolute, Zhou Yunsong was cold, and Ing Luoza was proud and aloof, and did not speak much when fighting, Han Yang had a sharp tongue. He looked at Bayan Great Sage and said slowly, "It's a pity that senior brother Tai isn't here, or we would have attacked directly instead of wasting time with this old lion." Perhaps it was the style of his seniors, or perhaps it was the strength of his own sect, but among everyone present, only Tang Jun could barely be considered to be proficient in both offense and defense. But in fact, he was stronger in offense than defense. Han Yang, Zhou Yunsong, and Ing Luoza, in a sense, could even be considered as only attacking and not defending. After all, Bayan Great Sage was a great demon at the realm of unity of star and soul. He was powerful, and if he fought with his life on the line, he could not be underestimated. Han Yang and the others were sharp in their attacks, and Bayan Great Sage was likely to die today. But it would take some patience to kill him here and now. Bayan Great Sage was also wounded at this moment. The most serious injury was caused by Han Yang. He stared coldly at the lazy purple-clothed young man in front of him and said, "I'll kill you first." As he spoke, his figure flashed and he pounced toward Han Yang. The purple smoke cosmic thunder that was like a purple cloud also shrouded Han Yang. Stars could be vaguely seen flashing in the purple cloud. Bayan Great Sage had completely given up on the idea of escaping at this moment. He wanted to exchange his life for a life, so he unleashed all his power. But even though he was going to fight with his life on the line, Bayan Great Sage did not lose his cool. He chose Han Yang as his target because of his anger, and also because he had judged from their previous exchange that although Han Yang had the strongest offensive power among Xianmen Tianzong and the others, he was also the weakest in defense. Han Yang looked at Bayan Great Sage, who was pouncing toward him. His expression was still lazy, but his eyes suddenly became sharp and piercing. He knew his strengths and weaknesses better than Bayan Great Sage. He had provoked Bayan Great Sage with words so that he could combine his own characteristics and lure Bayan Great Sage to choose him as his target. Seeing that Bayan Great Sage was indeed attacking him, Han Yang did not say a word. He manifested his primordial spirit avatar, and then blood chi filled the air and black light flashed. Beams of sword light intertwined in the air. Earth, water, fire, and wind surged, turning into 4 longswords, each with a different aura and sword will. Other than one sword that was similar to Han Yang's Luo Qinggu sword, the other 3 swords were similar to the Shushan Immortal Heavenly Sword Qi, the Elysium Heavenly Sword of 9 Heavens, and his own master, Sword Immortal Lord Luo Qingwu's primary spirit sword. The 4 swords stood side by side, sword light swirling. Countless sword chi and sword light spread out, vaguely forming a sword realm that looked like clouds and mist. This sword realm killed all intruders. Although the killing power was somewhat restrained, it seemed to be both offensive and defensive. Seeing this, Bayan Great Sage's heart sank. He knew that he had been tricked by Han Yang. He wanted to ignore everything else and forcefully break through Han Yang's sword realm, continuing to fight with his life on the line. But then he saw a brilliant light flashing between Tang Jun's brows, and a sky full of divine markings appeared. As the divine markings circled, they formed chain-like runes. The runes pierced through the void, causing the sky to change color. It was Tang Jun's divine light of creation. Previously, when Tang Jun used his divine light of creation, Bayan Great Sage already knew that it was a mystical treasure light that could make Tang Jun's other mystiques and immortality arts even more exquisite and complete. It was not just a simple increase in power, but also a more profound understanding. Although it was temporary, it was still mysterious. But now it seemed that Tang Jun's divine light of creation could not only be used on himself, but could also be used on others. At this point, how could Bayan Great Sage not understand that these young people before him had teamed up to dig a big hole for him? And now he was just going to crash into it by himself. Sadly, he couldn't stop even if he wanted to. Zhou Yunsong and Ing Rosa had seized this opportunity and were already attacking him. If he stopped now, he would be beaten up for nothing. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.